If we're going to lose it in one session, I think this is now it. So we're now streaming live to YouTube. So ladies and gentlemen, for anybody who's run out of things to watch on Netflix, Disney Plus, Now TV, or any of those other online streaming platforms, if you've run out of things to watch, there are hours of entertainment from this conference that we have recorded this week. We have been editing them into bite-sized chunks. So just in case you haven't already been exploring the website, and we see that lots of you have been doing this, we've been embedding all of your wonderful videos into the abstracts from the appropriate talk, if that makes any sense. So, for example, Amanda's talk from this morning, once we've edited it, and it is being edited at this precise second in time. So once that editing has been done, we will embed it inside her abstract. And what that will mean is it will be very easy for you to go and find that talk, watch it at your leisure. If you are a university lecturer or something like that, or you want to share it with your colleagues, so someone says, what is this raw materials energy transition thing all about? Well, you can just send them the URL to Amanda's talk, and there you go. Within 20 minutes, you will know everything you ever need to know. Well, you'll be inspired to go and learn more because she'll have given you a great introduction to that. So everything is split up into bite-sized chunks. We also have things like our wonderful little infographic. And actually, let me just show you this. So I will just quickly share my screen from this end. So we've got our infographic, which is being updated. So thank you very much to all of you who have been sharing different stakeholders. So those are the people or the groups in the dark speech bubbles. So different stakeholders who are interested in raw materials, and also the tools, tips, tricks, and techniques. Those are in the white little speech bubbles that can be used to help make ESG a reality. So we're looking for the things that we're missing. We are acutely aware that we don't have everything in this infographic as yet. This is a work in progress. So please do let us know what we are missing, and we will make sure it gets incorporated in the next iteration of this infographic. The infographic is free for you guys to download and use. And once we've got the final version, we will make sure that there is a high resolution, downloadable, clickable PDF or something like that. So it is very easy for you guys to take away and use. If you don't want to do that and you want to use it right away, just steal it by using a print screen or something like that. That is perfectly acceptable, and because it is there to be used and it is there to help you. Just before I welcome our first main speaker for today, two other things to add. So there's our schedule, just in case you want to find out about this afternoon. Click on the abstracts here by clicking on the Here button. We've still got 1 or 2 seats left on the training courses. So if anybody wants a seat on a free training course, because we've had lots of lovely sponsorship that's come in that is allowing us to run these training courses for free. So I think we've got seats left on the responsible mining and sourcing training course, and also the integrated risk management in mining training course. Apologies for the timing of these, because they are really early in the morning for you guys. But if you are interested in the training course and you feel that you are missing out on these seats and you're interested in future dates, please do let us know by sending an email either to rose@hello@responsiblerawmaterials.com or to ellen@satala.com. And I'm sure that their email addresses will appear in the chat as I'm probably speaking right this second. So if you're interested in the training courses, please do feel free to go for that. And thank you very much to our sponsors for making all of that happen. The final thing to mention is our little competition that we have running. And that is, last year, we had a competition for people to send in drawings of what they thought a mine looked like. And there were some fabulous suggestions, especially from people's children who were trapped with them at home. If we cast our minds back 12 months, we kind of almost thought that lockdown was still a bit of an adventure rather than a profession. And I think now we're all quite good at lockdown because most of us are still in it. But this is a case here where we had some fabulous drawings that came in last year that gave us great insight as to how different people perceive mining. This year, we're changing it up a little bit. And instead of asking you, what do you think a mine looks like? We're asking you, what do you think a responsible mine looks like? Now, it might look exactly the same, or it might look very different. What do you think? You guys tell us, and we'll be able to assimilate them together. And this does go into a research project. So you are helping a lovely lady with her PhD research as well. So please do send through those pictures to hello@responsiblerawmaterials.com. Rose loves nothing more than to receive all of your wonderful drawings. And don't worry, no drawing is bad. They are all wonderful. Okay, everybody has some level of artistic ability, and you're all better than me. So please do feel free to submit those fantastic drawings to us. Right, Rose, Ellen, any other little messages I need to give to people, or are we all okay? I'm getting the thumbs up. Excellent. So this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the world, what do we have in store? Well, we're going to start off. Okay, so this afternoon is an afternoon. Oh, sorry, this session is the session of Sarah's. I challenge you to say that after a few drinks, okay? Because there'll be too much shitting going in there. Okay, so our first speaker this afternoon is the wonderful Sarah Caven, and I can see Sarah there. Sarah, give us a wave. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to kick off with Sarah, which will be absolutely fantastic. And Sarah gave us a fantastic talk last year that has been really well cited. So thank you very much, Sarah, for coming back again. We're then going to go to John Thompson. So his name is not Sarah Thompson, he's John Thompson. Okay, and John is going to give us his insight into ESG and mining, and especially taking a look at some reflections with regards to, I don't know, something to do with a pandemic. I don't know, who knows, something maybe has gone on over the last 12, 18 months or so. So then we've got the fantastic John Thompson. We have then got the brilliant Remy. So Remy, give us a wave, who is currently in Panama and later on today may be in Miami if we run on time and he manages to catch that flight. So Remy is going to be talking to us about innovation and best practices in community engagement. Okay, so we're going to have another little look at the community engagement side of things, which will be absolutely brilliant. Then we go to another Sarah Webber, give us a wave. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so Sarah is going to be talking about the S in ESG. Okay, so we've got loads of insights on the social side of ESG this week, which is brilliant. So there's so much information here, really, really good tips and tricks and ideas that we've got there. So Sarah is going to be talking about building positive, respectful Indigenous relationships for mineral explorers. So really looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Sarah. Then we go into Carly Becker. Carly, give us a wave. Fantastic. I'm loving this, Rose, by the way. We've got everybody here at the beginning of the session. We haven't been able to do the waving before. So thank you very much to session number 7. This is great. Carly is going to be talking to us from about governance changing regulatory demands from an employee perspective. So really looking forward to that talk, Carly. That's going to be fantastic. Then we go to Nick. Nick, give us a wave. There he is, fantastic, with beautiful well maps on the wall behind him, who's going to be talking about the need for improved methods of monitoring tailings dams. Oh, our favourite structures in the world. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks very much, Nick. And then we're going to go to Heather and to Catherine. So Catherine, give us a wave. There she is, beautiful. And Heather, Catherine, I'm going to get really mixed up with this one, Catherine. Can we mix the names together? Nah, it doesn't really work. Yes, it does. Excellent. Heather Catherine is going to be talking about visualizing a social license to operate. So what does this look like? So this is going to be brilliant. Then we go to Aileen. Aileen, give us a wave. There she is, brilliant. Who's going to be talking about equality, diversity and inclusion in geoscience. So this comes out the back of a brilliant initiative and then big conference and now organisation that was set up through the course of last year. So really looking forward to the developments and the update that you'll be giving us there, Aileen, which would be brilliant. Then we have the wonderful Rob, who's going to be talking to us about innovation and best practices in community engagement towards the social licensing of extractive projects. See, we've got 1 or 2 social talks this afternoon, which is great. And finally, we've got the fabulous Tom Butler. Tom, give us a wave. Excellent. Many of you may recognise him as Mr. ICMM, okay, so the International Council for Mining and Metals. But Tom, you've now escaped, haven't you?
I have escaped. I'm free. I'm a free man.
He's a free man.
I'm free to attend your entire panel.
Yes, check it out. We would never have been able to have Tom for the entire thing last time. So we're really looking forward to Tom. Tom's joining us for the final panel session, and will hopefully be able to give us his insight as to what has resonated for him in terms of some of the talks, and also his perspective on different tools, etc., with regards to ESG in mining. So how do we actually make it a reality, both in the mining space, but then also more broadly across the whole raw materials value chain. So looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Tom. So it's going to be an action-packed session, isn't it? It's going to be great. And I'm going to go swiftly across to the wonderful Sarah Caven. So Sarah, I don't know if you are sharing slides or if you're just speaking to us. Now is your moment to find that mute button, because I'm going to invite yourself to introduce yourself as well. And let you get started with your talk. And that looks like a beautiful picture. Always love the pictures. So
thank you, Sarah.
There we go. So Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself, and off you go?
Absolutely. So yes, thank you for inviting me back to speak again at this great conference. Basically, yeah, today I want to try and do a rapid, I guess, whistle-stop tour of my story, starting off as a mineral exploration geologist and now becoming really interested in this whole challenge of how do we actually invest in delivering on the resource and future generations challenge. So basically, yeah, this first image is me back in the day in Ethiopia as a geologist. We were exploring for precious and base metal resources. And yeah, when I was a geology undergrad and in my sort of early career, ESG wasn't really, front of focus as such. But when I reflect back on it, we were doing a bunch of things just almost, intuitively because it made sense. So you're living and working in these really remote situations. You're always looking for ways to engage with the community, to find local suppliers. To one example, we were finding suppliers who could make core trays for us and sample bags, etc., rather than importing them from outside. But these kind of stories I found weren't really being told. And so I got really, really inspired, especially in my time in Ethiopia, as to this huge sort of unharnessed potential and opportunity in the natural resources sector to do a better job of both telling our stories and actually also doubling down on those opportunities to create more sustainable and equitable business models where you have that interface between government, investment, private sector, communities, and also artisanal and small scale mining. I think that's often, until more recently, has been quite overlooked in terms of this whole narrative around responsible mining. So yeah, this is where it all started off for me, I guess, where I got my inspiration. So yeah, rocking up to this underexplored territory in Ethiopia with lots of opportunity to find resources. But really, for me, I think, yeah, starting off with that initial excitement of, I'm a geologist, I've got to find the $1 million ounces of gold, to then kind of pivoting and thinking, hey, actually, what can I do to actually contribute to the bigger challenge, which is finding better ways to do business and secure these resources that are ever increasingly important for our transition to a greener economy. So yeah, motivated by ways to find ways to try and bridge this gap, I actually stepped out of exploration and went back to university, to business school. And I guess these kind of concepts now are sort of front of mind. So how the things I was trying to pick up or trying to understand was, how do all the different pieces of the puzzle fit together? So for example, how do we actually find a way to operate within our planetary constraints, within our societal needs and constraints, given the ever increasing expectations that we have of our mining industry to deliver both the resources, but in a responsible fashion? So the mine of the future, what does that look like? So if we think about the mine sitting in the center as part of the economy, right now it's ever more increasingly important to find ways to innovate in terms of technology, to find more efficient ways to do what we do, to innovate also in terms of business models. So how do we integrate better with community and government needs, for example? How do we ensure that we're securing and working towards social license and actual global acceptance? So we have this huge drive towards the low carbon economy and a sustainable future for our planet, but there's often a gap in terms of people's perception of the mining industry and its role in delivering on that. Often the mining industry can be perceived as somewhat of the enemy or a barrier to achieving those goals. And so in terms of then operating within what society needs, more and more we're seeing a spotlight on how do we deliver in terms of human and indigenous rights. How do we promote more transparent sourcing? So society is demanding resources, but ever increasingly they want to know where those are coming from and how they've been sourced. And then our planetary boundaries. So how do we do this all within, water constraints, land constraints? How do we balance the needs between sort of agriculture and resource extraction, for example? So, So yeah, as I mentioned, it doesn't take much to see, what's going on in the media. We're seeing all kinds of shifts that are happening, seem to be happening faster and faster in terms of the momentum and the pressure on the mining industry. So we see, for example, supply chain, the midstream and the downstream facing ever increasing pressure to clean up their own supply chain. So in terms of where are they sourcing these metals from and how are they being sourced? We're seeing changes in law. So companies being tried now domestically for human rights abuses, for example, that may have occurred abroad. We're seeing this whole shift towards climate risk and decarbonization becoming so central to mining companies, where before it might have been something much more peripheral. We have also this huge sort of impending, as people are often talking about, this huge impending challenge to resource this electric vehicle transition. And as I mentioned, consumers and society at large is looking for more transparency around how we're sourcing and supplying our minerals and materials. And also we're seeing, innovation, not just at the mining level responding to this challenge, but also downstream. So for example, Apple looking at closing its own supply chain to actually reduce its dependency on primary resources. So taking a bit of a step back, I love this curve of adoption. I come back to it often. But I think it's really interesting to apply it to different aspects of the mining industry. So for example, who are we seeing that are actually the innovators who are disrupting our industry and providing solutions to these challenges? Something that actually goes beyond just, for example, ESG compliance, to actually investing in business model innovation at the core of what we're doing. So it's becoming embedded into corporate strategy. And there's a couple of examples I think I'm just going to refer to briefly that I think are interesting. So, for example, we see Cobalt Metals, who's looking at supplying critical metals to industry, and what they're doing is unique and different in terms of the fact they're actually taking sort of Silicon Valley data science approach, so big data, machine learning, etc., and combining that with patient capital. So having this longer term view, not being so sort of time constrained and rushed, kind of keep drilling, return these drill results, deliver shareholder value, etc. Keep moving things forward to actually find better ways and more efficiently and ethically providing these critical metals. Another one, Ionian Resources, is a really interesting mineral exploration company that just recently launched, which actually puts really interesting values at the core of its business model. So they talk about decarbonization, decolonization, this focus on donut economics, essentially operating within our planetary limits, all while defining this next sort of wave of resources within to meet the needs of society, but within sort of a more values-oriented framework, which is embedded at the core of what they're doing. And so one thing as well that I've been more focused on recently is looking at investment and how that's changing. And so if we think about this idea of the investment spectrum, so having everything from finance first, which is maybe more traditionally what we've seen in the mining industry with limited regard for ESG, say, moving towards a more responsible investment scenario where we have ESG mitigation. But then, what's next? How do we push the needle forward even further? Is it this idea of actually having sustainable investing with progressive ESG, pursuing these high impact opportunities and actually ultimately trying to deliver on measurable high impact solutions? And what's the role of impact finance or grant and donor funding to kind of push things on the other side in terms of that innovation around the technical aspect, to find a meeting in the middle where we can really drive and scale our innovation in industry? So a few things just to quickly skim over. So a few things I think are perhaps most interesting in this space. seeing how venture capital is changing. So we're seeing increasingly venture capitalists investing into what's being called climate tech, even mining tech and decarbonization. We're seeing impact investors changing their perception. It's really early days, but a few that I've been talking to, for example, are starting to recognize that if they want to have impact in renewable resources, they have to actually invest upstream into those minerals that are part of that infrastructure. And also looking at it from an artisanal and small scale mining perspective, impact investing has a very interesting role there to play in terms of actually delivering on social, economic, environmental impact in these smaller mining communities too. And then, as I mentioned, downstream, they're disrupting things hugely. So we see, articles about Tesla investing upstream, acquiring or developing partnerships with mines. We see tech companies like Apple closing the loop and trying to reduce their actual dependency on mining itself. So very quickly to wrap up, my sort of sketched out thought inspired by an article in TechCrunch is, what does the future of mining actually look like? Are we entering this new mining paradigm, and what will we see that's going to disrupt our traditional business model? So for a long time, it's been about access to resources, license tenure, etc., capital. But now it's becoming more and more about vertical integration, partnerships, this idea almost of network effects that we talk about in the tech industry, social license to operate. And how do we do this quickly to respond to the needs of the tech industry, which is changing every day? It's so fast. So I think it's a really exciting time for our industry. Yeah. I'm curious to see what happens next over the next few years.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together from the other side of those muted microphones. A massive thank you for Sarah Caven. So now I know that you will have lots of fabulous questions for Sarah. Please do pop them into chat or into the Q&A function, and we'll be able to get to them during the course of the session. Also, if you are watching live from YouTube, and I can see lots of you are beginning to sneak in there on the YouTube channel, please do feel free to put your questions into the chat on the YouTube and we will pull them across. Sarah, just in the interests of time, I'm going to go straight into John's talk, but I'm sure that there will be lots of questions coming in on the chat for you. So thank you very much. Once again, another little round of applause for Sarah Caven. Thank you very much. Brilliant. So, ladies and gentlemen, on to our second speaker of this session. It is the one and only John Thompson. Now, John, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to tell all kinds of stories. No, don't worry. They're all fantastic. And so, John, if you've got slides, if you want to start sharing them now, or I'm sure that you can multitask and introduce yourself at the same time as sharing. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic John Thompson. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Sarah. I'm going to just talk for a few moments and then I'm going to add my slides. So just want to say a few words. So I am an earth scientist by training and by inclination, but for the last probably 20 years, I've done all sorts of other things, including some earth science. Fortunately, I still get to look at rocks. And so I've been involved in innovation, sustainability, and a lot of the topics that Sarah was just talking about. Thank you very much, Sarah, including cobalt. So that was I didn't ask for that. So thank you very much for that quick mention. And I've done that in academia, 3 universities and a couple of major companies and a lot of other companies. So I generally tell people that I'm still trying to work out what it is I want to do when I grow up, and hopefully it'll become clearer at some point. But in the meantime, I have a lot of fun. So this time last year, of course, we were doing this. We were part of this amazing conference. At least I was, not all of us, but I was very fortunate to be part of it. And for me, it kind of set the bar for virtual conferences. I mean, it was one of the first, certainly it was the first one I think I was involved in, and it set the bar for virtual conferences. We really didn't know what that was at this point. And perhaps for me, more important than the conference was it set the bar for discussion, virtual discussion. And that was a very neat concept that many have replicated, but perhaps none quite as well as Sarah and team did right at the outset. So congratulations to you for that and for doing it, for risking doing it again, and this time with a lot of competition. There's a lot of other things. Sarah and I were talking earlier, there's a lot of other events going on right now around the world using this medium. So today, what I want to do is I just wanted to think back on where we were this time last year. And as I thought about that in the context of this conference, there was tremendous uncertainty. As Sarah said, many of us were in lockdown then. Some of us still are in lockdown now. And we didn't know at that point where things were going. There was uncertainty around the industry, around metal prices. No one knew exactly what was going to happen, whether people were going to do any exploration at all. And there was massive uncertainty, I think, about ESG. People were very concerned as to whether it would just slip off the agenda. You know, there would be so much concern and other things happening in the world, difficult issues that we were dealing with, that ESG would just, you know, slide off the top spot and perhaps, you know, disappear off the profile for many companies. And unfortunately, that turned out not to be the case. In fact, you know, many things turned out not to be the case. Many of our worst fears were not realized, which is a good thing. For us who are fortunate, obviously many unfortunate people didn't fare so well. But for the mining industry, the metal prices came back, things recovered. And ESG not only was there still, I think it continued to rise in importance and received more and more attention, as did climate change. And so climate change did not fall off the agenda. In fact, quite the reverse. It's absolutely there, front and center. So again, as I thought about this, I thought, well, what encapsulated to me some things around ESG in the last year? And there were three things that really hit home for me, and to some extent that I was involved in. So it's these three things that I want to talk about very briefly this morning. So I'm just going to share my screen here, all being well. And now you should be seeing a wonderful picture, or not so wonderful picture, actually, of Brumadinho, a disaster of unmitigated significance for everybody, and especially for the many people who lost their lives in that event. And this has been discussed a few times in this conference already. It was a wake-up call for the industry, and the net result of that was these two volumes which are on the left side of the screen here that were released by the three partners, ICMM, UNEP, and PRI in August 2020. And these were massive collaborative efforts. They took 2 years, more or less, plus or minus, to produce, and Tom Butler would know more about the exact timing than I do, but I got involved relatively late in the piece. But it was an extraordinary effort by a lot of people to really think this through and produce the global industry standards on tailings management. And alongside it, the Towards Zero Harm, which was a compendium of amazing papers that go into great depth on many of the issues. And you can see here on the slide what this amounted to: 6 topic areas, 15 principles, 77 auditable requirements, etc. So that's a fantastic, fantastic result and a fantastic effort, fundamental to a big part of ESG. And these are just a couple of slides from a couple of the papers in that compendium. The one on the left just illustrates the problem. And if you can look closely on your screen, you can see the size of the many zeros behind each of those numbers. That is 72 billion tons of waste rock in 2016. That was 1 year. That is 8.85 billion tons of tailings in 1 year. And this is the scale of the problem that we're talking about. Massive, massive issue, massive, massive challenge. And on the right comes from Angela Cupper's work. And this is a diagram that just demonstrates that while tailings is a technical problem, and we had some discussion around the technical challenges of upstream tailings dams and so on, it isn't just a technical problem. It's part of a very complex system, complicated and complex, a complex system which is within the context of an operational mine and the people who live around that mine, the communities and everybody who's involved and potentially affected by a tailings dam disaster. And we need to treat it as a system and understand it, because verifying, implementing and verifying change in tailings isn't going to just be an engineer redesigning a new tailings dam. It's going to be a lot of thought about what tailings are, how we can reduce the amounts of tailings we produce, how we can look at different ways to manage tailings. And all of that plays into the economics of the mine, the processing of the mine, the nature of the rocks, et cetera, and all the people involved in making the decisions. It truly is a complex system. And if we're going to address it, it's going to take a lot more work in the future to build on that great starting point of the standard. So the big question that remains is implementation and verification. And will we actually see real change in the coming years? Hopefully, it's worth remembering that we had a disaster, a massive tailings disaster, almost every 2 to 3 years for a number of years. And so we hopefully, as we go forward, we won't be seeing that again. So I'll go to another very topical issue. This is the iron ore, the destruction of the heritage belonging to the PKKP in Western Australia at Juukan Gorge. And again, other people have referenced this, and it may receive more comments as in the remainder of the conference. But I just want to put this in the context of iron ore. So it's worth just thinking about what it is that this is all about. It is, for the mining industry, all about iron ore. And in 2020, this time last year, on this slide, you can see that so the prices in April last year were $85 a ton. But by May, by the time of this conference last year, they were beginning to rise. They're up to $94 per ton. By today's prices, actually, I wrote this last night, $230 a ton. I just noted that it's $237 today. The cost in 2020 of producing a ton of iron ore was $34, just over $34. So you can all quickly do the math and realize that the margins on iron ore production are incredible. They are ludicrous. They were enormous back in May last year, and they are 2+ times as large now this time. And so, and there at the top point there, 909 billion tons, that should say, sorry, not million tons. There's no, it is million tons. Stick with my million, stick with my facts. Nearly 1 billion tons of iron ore was produced out of Western Australia in 2020. So multiply 1 billion times the margin, and you can get an appreciation for the amount of revenue being generated by iron ore just in Western Australia, most of which, of course, is going to China. So all of that, when you think about that, you think about the amount of money being made, the pressure on producers to produce is enormous. And so what happens? A massive, to me, unacceptable mistake was made. And that was on the 23rd of May, only a couple of weeks after the conference last year, as we discussed about our concerns about would ESG slip. ESG didn't just slip, it collapsed in this particular case. And we destroyed 46,000 years of cultural history in one blast. So just a tragic, tragic event. And you can only imagine what the PKK people felt about that. But the whole ramifications that through accountability, organization, governance, etc., all of those things came to play. Rio Tinto suffered from top to bottom. And you know, it was a unmitigated disaster. For me, it was, you know, I wouldn't say personal because that's, you know, for the PKKP, this was personal. But for me, it certainly was very disappointing for two reasons. One, I used to work for Rio Tinto and I still had friends working for Rio Tinto and I was very disappointed. But secondly, I happen to have a very archaeological background, a father who was an archaeologist and a daughter who is now an archaeologist. So heritage to me is not something you play with. Heritage is critically important to humanity and to our lives and understanding of our history. So it hurt seeing this happen. And the question we have to ask is, have we learned from that? And I asked that, and I put that in the context of these rising metal prices, because it's not just iron ore now prices. Other things going up, particularly copper, is up to levels of 2010. And will that pressure to produce mean that we will sacrifice principles and values and our ESG approach to things? So I think I pose that to the audience and to the other panelists to think about. So the last thing I want to talk about very briefly is the critical minerals and metal space. And this is, again, has received some attention already in this conference. Peter Bryant touched on it in his talk on early on in the conference. And so what are they? Just a very quick reminder, you know, these are the critical metals and minerals we need for the energy transition. They drive electric vehicles, batteries, wind turbines, etc. But they're also highly important for many technical reasons. And they're critical because they have restricted supply. They're coming from countries that are not regarded as safe or politically stable, etc., have environmental concerns. They have complex supply chains that may be disrupted, etc. The important thing to remember on these is it's dynamic. A metal or mineral that's critical this year may not be next year because a new supply may appear and that may solve some of the problem. And so this dynamic aspect is illustrated in this slide, which is an EU slide with a periodic table, and it's color-coded by when these particular elements were critical, and it's changed between 2011, 2014, and 2017. And you can show the same slides, similar types of ones for the US, for Canada, for Australia, etc. In fact, the US just produced its update on Monday this week, obviously just to time it with this conference, because they thought that would be an important thing to do. And so it's a very dynamic situation. It's important to also remember, although these are the critical ones because they are very special, even things like copper and aluminium are in immense demand because of for the same reason, because of electrification. These two elements, copper and aluminium, are absolutely vital in electrification. So that's driving the demand, whereas it's the battery technology story that's driving lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite, etc. So important to remember that each one of these commodities is different. Their story is different, their location, the type of mine they come from, the extraction is different, the supply chains are different, and their recycling potential is different. So while we lump them together as this group of metals or minerals and call them critical, they're not the only thing, that's not the only thing about them. They all have very complex stories in their own right. So this week, interesting, again, another thing came out this week. This was the new IEA report called The Role of Critical Minerals in Energy Transition. And it's somewhat similar to the World Bank efforts over the last 3 or 4 years that have looked at the demand that will increase in these commodities as a result of the drive towards the energy transition. So a similar kind of approach, some different data, fantastic report, 230 odd pages of packed with data. And these are just a couple of diagrams, couple of figures from that report. But I particularly like the quote, which I reproduced in the top left, which says, "The mineral requirements of an energy system powered by clean energy technologies differs profoundly," and profoundly is the key word here, "from one fueled by traditional hydrocarbon resources." And that's going to touch everything. And one of their key points on the bottom left is the supply chain in oil and gas, in fossil fuels, is quite dispersed and quite well understood. The supply chain in many of these minerals is highly concentrated, particularly by China. And in this diagram, on the left side of the diagram here, they talk about the mining side, which is, certainly China appears and DRC appears in terms of cobalt. But over here on the right, you can see the importance of China when it comes down into the supply chain in terms of processing. They are the dominant player, and geopolitics is going to be a very important part of our lives as we deal with that going forward. But the key message on these metals and minerals is we have to think of them in a supply chain context, not just in an extractive and resource context. And the slide on the right just illustrates their IEA's view of the amount of additional material that's going to be needed by 2040 for those key commodities to meet the sustainable development objectives of clean energy and so on. Again, very similar to the approach by the World Bank. Lastly, point I want to make on this is people are thinking about new sources for these metals, and one that's come to light again after many previous iterations is the potential of the nodules on the ocean floor. And these are some pictures of the manganese nodules in the deep Pacific. And the area of focus currently is the central Western Pacific, the Clarion-Clipperton zone. And things happened in 2021. In fact, a lot happened in this space. And in the early 2021, GSR started some trial mining, and this is in the center of the picture is their vehicle that they dropped on the bottom, and then immediately thereafter lost for a short period of time. So they went fishing and recovered it. But so there's trial mining of these nodules going on as we speak. And then perhaps for me, even more surprising was that one of the other companies, Deep Green, managed to do a SPAC, which I hope many of you will have heard of, which is a way of raising an enormous amount of money on the market through a special purpose acquisition company, hence SPAC. And they have access to about $500 million here to proceed along this venture. The arguments made by these companies, and this is where it comes into the ESG space, is that extracting these metals from the ocean floor is better than land-based mining. Better because there's no communities, obviously, so there's not going to be any ESG issues with local communities, and countries with no resources are going to benefit from the production. But we have massive environmental uncertainties. Do we really know what we're doing down there? And will we ever be able to see what we're doing down there? At least in a mine on land, we know what we're doing well, and you can visibly see what we're not doing well. So there's a big question there. And clearly we need a lot more review in this space. So just to wrap up, so these are my post-pandemic thoughts, if you like, or sin-pandemic thoughts. The metal prices were off and roaring. And does that equate to increased performance risk? I think that's something we thought about that last year. I think we need to think about it again now. Mining industry supplies these critical metals, these things that we really need for the energy transition. That's really important. But we can't just in the mining industry so clap our backs, hands on our backs, say we're great, we supply these wonderful things, and then do a poor job of providing them. Clearly, we have to have high levels of performance. We need some new sources for some of these things, some of the critical minerals I just talked about, but we actually need to focus on the full supply chain. We need to look at how we process these right through to the consumer, and the consumer needs to be a key part of that equation. And the focus needs to be unmitigatingly, absolutely on ESG, plus I for indigenous It's got to be unwavering in our efforts to try and meet the needs of communities, but also the needs of the industry, investors, customers, society, and so on. And that's going to require a lot of governance and change. And I don't see enough effort on the governance and change side of things yet to meet these questions that I just raised. So thanks very much, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, John. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the wonderful John Thompson. That was brilliant. Thank you. Now, as the questions come in, and I can see that they are beginning to come in now, which is great. John, just in terms of the deep sea mining, so obviously, you know, the concept and actually people trying to enact mining underneath the ocean or on the ocean floor has been around for a while, but it kind of always grinds to a halt. Do you think this is actually going to be up and flying now, or do you think it's going to still take a long while for it to get going as an industry?
I think it's going to take a while, but a long while, I don't know. There are still many challenges and again, the challenges are not so much in how we pluck these nodules off the seafloor. The challenges are how do we do this environmentally in the most effective and benign manner, and that's just going to be a very difficult thing to establish from a baseline point of view and then act on and then monitor. So I think there's a lot of work there, and then I think we're the full supply chain from the seafloor to the customer is a wide open question. We still don't have really the processing route that clearly provides the metals in an efficient way. And the third thing that worries me a lot is the major element of the seafloor is manganese. You know, it accounts for up to 30% of these nodules. We don't need as much manganese as that in the world. So if we start producing a lot of nodules, we're going to have a lot of manganese that we actually don't need now, unless we find some new use for it. And that plays into the economics of the whole exercise. So I think there's a lot of questions still. Obviously, it's moving right now, and a lot of things are going to come to a head quite quickly. And then how fast it really develops out as a sector, I think, remains to be seen.
Thanks for that, John. Yeah, we certainly don't need to be adding to that 72 billion tons of waste with a whole load of manganese that we didn't need to mine in the first place. Right. Second question for you here is, do you think, and this is a nasty question, so my apologies, given that the governments of the world have all been stating lots of lovely targets about net zero, etc., do you think it is actually possible for us to hit those targets given the supply-demand deficit?
Well, the question would be by when. I mean, if you're at 2050 targets, I presume they're the most kind of well-defined ones, questionably well-defined ones. I think the resource issue is going to be not as dramatic a constraint, at least in terms of availability of resources. It's not going to be a dramatic constraint. I think we have the resources. Will we be able to develop them? And this is where ESG becomes probably the key part, if not the Achilles heel of the question. You know, will we be allowed to develop them by communities and other peoples and jurisdictions in a way that's efficient and effective? So I see a lot of hick bumps on the road. I think we can get there by 2050, but it's not going to be a nice, smooth kind of linear growth curve. It's going to be very bumpy. And there's going to be a lot of big issues that we're going to have to deal with if we're going to get to producing that amount of material. That's on the supply side. On the sort of development of technology side, there's a lot of work there to be done as well. So I am an optimist like you, Sarah, I know. So I hate to say it can't be done, because can't is a word that's not in my vocabulary, but it is going to be very difficult.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that, John. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic John Thompson. Brilliant. Thank you. So moving from the big world of tailings, caves, critical materials and deep sea mining to Remy, who's now going to start speaking about people. So Remy, if you'd like to share your screen, I know that you've come off mute already. I will let you introduce yourself because you know exactly where you are working now, etc., because I know that you have changed and it's really exciting. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Remy Peat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Rose. Also, I'll start obviously by echoing John's congratulations and comments and gratefulness for the invitation. A great conference as always. What we've done, and actually it's not that we changed structure. Unbelief Advisory had an agreement with America's Market Intelligence over the last 4 years, and we went back to becoming independent. We're working with a series of companies in the energy and mining sector out of Qatar originally, and specifically in Latin America and Africa on some of their properties. What I wanted to do today, and I really took literally the idea of ESG Toolbox, is I would have liked to maybe run you through one of our solutions rather than simply a PowerPoint. So I'm going to maybe show 1 or 2 slides, but then literally walk you through one of the platforms that we use in terms of interacting with communities. One of the reasons we've developed it is that obviously with COVID, and we're under contract with 2 majors in terms of working with, especially with the oppositions to mining projects, usually green tourism, indigenous communities, or companies into the, let's say, farming sector, whether coffee growers or others. And our work was really to try to help them find other sources of income or facilitate their work on the side of mining companies, being able to bridge them to additional partners. And obviously with COVID hitting, our capacity to be on the ground was limited. So we actually reached out to a series of different company and platform providers, set up on Citizen Lab out of Brussels, and build a partnership of trying to find a way to engage with communities and provide them with geographically restricted social media option that will allow us to integrate and to communicate on 24/7 basis with communities, and also offer them a space for their own communication. So really working on this idea of communication has to be a two-way street, not only coming down from the mining companies about their project, but also allowing other stakeholders to communicate about their own operation and therefore not feel, let's say, dwarfed by the large international investment into that sphere. I'm just going to go into, maybe 2 slides on this. It's actually one of the platform we're proposing should be Vilcast. I mean, if you know should be Vilcast, you probably know which one we're talking about here. But the entire idea of the platform is really to engage with communities regularly, to verify their concerns and their claims, and therefore being able to provide this buffer zone between the mining company and the communities of limiting the conflictivity by engaging with the communities on behalf of the mining company, verifying their claims, verifying their concerns online, and then obviously when we can, I'm actually now on the ground, but now that we can also continue and follow up on the field. Engage in dialogue and have this two-way communication. The benefits for mining companies are usually reduced costs on their operations and community management engagements, have always, as I said, a 24/7 link with the communities, especially with the antagonistic interests, and trying to find a common ground, build cross-sectoral collaboration with some of those sectors to limit the inevitable opposition between usually more traditional anti-mining interests and the mining community. It's very important for us in terms of investors relations, because the platform that I'm going to show allow for any kind of investor relation manager, when he actually talks through source of financing, to show that the relationship with communities is actually a dynamic, regular relation, and they're able to raise alarms or raise concerns as soon as it arrives, and also build, as I'm going to show, kind of the basis for knowledge development, inclusive development, and SDG value creation. We actually have since the start of this platform last year, we've built partnership with different entrepreneurs, but also as far as universities and UNICEF. We have a mandate on UNICEF on 2 countries, trying to help them relate with the mining sectors, and trying to see how to engage better and build this link of trust between the different actors. I'm not going to run you through the whole presentation. Obviously, I'm happy to share it with anyone that would be interested. But I think maybe what could be more interesting for me is just directly to dive into, for you, not for me, but would be to dive into the presentation itself and give you the presentation, the platform itself, so that you can actually have a tour of what it looks like. So I don't know if you can actually see it right now. It's basically the same structure. If you know Citizen Lab, it's a very similar structure at the Citizen Lab platform. And going back to Citizen Lab, they actually are been around for 5-6 years, engaging in large cities such as Vancouver, Brussels, again, in terms of community engagements for local referendum, for decisions of whether or not you have cars downtown, for example, and others like that. And we actually transformed it to actually be more relevant to mining jurisdiction, especially mining communities. The types of content that we offer, because there's not only in terms of that's the feeling of the platform, but this is the kind of content and way to interact. On the case of El Pangui, for example, which is a small city in Ecuador, they could not run the El Pangui Queens Festival, which is not only a beauty contest, it's also a possibility for indigenous communities to be able to show what they stand for, and for also promoting a series of social engagements from community actors. And so we actually proposed through this the capacity for the communities to be able to provide their own space into this restricted social media. Why am I talking about restricted social media? Because the entire objective of this is to limit the debate or the discussion about social license to the actual community itself, and therefore not add the external negative externalities from, let's say, international NGOs that might be well-intentioned but don't understand the reality on the ground, or political interest for the capital cities that actually could be pulling in one direction or another, but really to have a verified link only with the community members and be able to build some partnership with them. The way it is, so for example, these are content that were from community actors when they actually ran their suggestions for the elections. But for example, as I was saying, all these contents is actually mastered by the either unbelieved advisories. So there's no opposition taking over, let's say, the editorial guidelines or content of the platform itself. But all the comment sections is actually the individual connectivity connections linked from each community actors or members that want to comment on anything. That could be on local referendum about the best restaurant, or sharing a cooking tip, or anything that could be around this, or also discussions about what is going on and what should be the future of the territory itself. So I mean, that's kind of the sales pitch that we have here, but it's about developing citizen participation, listen to community members, create virtual roundtable. I'm going to show right away also kind of the Big Brother side of it, so you can see how we can actually gather data and be able to engage better with different community actors. Actually, I could show it right now. That might be interesting. First of all, there's also a very interesting capacity to change languages. We built in on different languages to be able to engage with other companies, they actually investors, so they can see what's going on the actual level of on the actual site where they actually are invested, or the company that they're supporting. But so it could be also we're developing it, for example, in Quechua or Aymara for also indigenous communities if they actually don't have the limited capacity to speak into Spanish in some of the operations in Latin America that we work in. But the idea here is really to try to be able to provide a series of content, or provide a series of interaction with communities and actors. So for example, if I go here on the activity, but I want to know, since it's a social media, anyone can talk about anything, but I want to know who has been talking about water for the last few, let's say, days or weeks, and you have all the comments that have been using the word water. So that can help, some of them can be completely irrelevant, such as my cat was outside, got wet, and it brought water inside the house. But it could be also being able to reach out to people that are usually not very much present into the roundtables. Usually all those roundtables or public hearings are often being led by 4 or 5 key community actors or political actors that pretend they represent the entire community. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they also have their own personal interest. Here, the idea is to be able to engage with community, individuals that usually don't show up to those large events, or are more shy to actually, interact with the mining company or with the subcontractors, and be able to engage with them, through the platform ahead of the roundtable, or afterwards, also to be able to show the accountability on the commitments that was made towards the communities. There's a series of ways to actually work afterwards. I mean, here you can actually have workshop, you can embed Zoom presentations, you can have different trainings. So one of the things that we did, for example, we have made an agreement with a content provider for public schools in the US, and they gave us their content for English for 5 years old, for example. So every week you can actually provide some educational content to the community, whether it's the English language, as I said, or it could be trainings on anything. We've done some trainings, for example, for the local hairdressers, by just reaching out to some of our friends in France in hair salons that could actually show them how to do the layers haircut in France, for example, and therefore create an emulation between the different hairdressers in the area of influence of the mine. But that could be, I mentioned hairdressers, it could be also different content in terms of best practices for the farming industries. It could be, best content for a series of technical, teaching for, maintenance, or for small entrepreneurs in a series of different areas. It is really a way and that's a gate to be able to provide both trainings and to also ensure that you have direct communication with each one of your community actors. Decision-making purposes could be, for example, on, let's say, a mining company wants to, develop a project. They don't know which kind of project would be more, impactful, or would be the one that would make more sense for the communities, whether it's actually to engage into, let's say, a sustainable coffee or a different project. Then you can actually suggest to the community actors to choose for it. So basically vote on it on the platform. Doesn't need to have like a Wi-Fi and a computer. You can actually have it on your cell phones, any kind of, network that actually is 3G. You don't need to have more than 3G. So here in Panama, we just just tested it and it's working absolutely fine. To be able to engage and give the decision from the community and engage in building a partnership between the mining companies and the communities in choosing the partnership that they want to engage in and the project that they want to develop. And then obviously, you know, one of the issues that we're seeing in terms of engaging to the roundtables, often you have, you know, a roundtable, a public hearing every 3 months, but you come back and you're back to, it's not that you're back to square one, but you actually didn't get the possibility to maintain that link with the community actors. You can actually here, you know, have a follow-up on the different, you know, commitment that you made, explain where you're moving forward, having them commented, as I said, you know, in terms of what they could be providing in terms of comments, or having them understand why some of those elements or decisions have been delayed, trying to be able to continuously having this 24/7 link with different community actors that will comment, provide also, you know, very much verified information. Let's say you have this, and we work on a specific case where there were discussion whether or not they had an agreement on deforestation, reforestation. Well, you can actually on those platforms provide, you know, the scan of those agreements, being able to share the right communication. If there's a press article or there's an event, you actually have this space to be able to discuss about between the community actors, the individual community actors, and bring in, let's say, some experts or some elements of some people that actually can comment on and explain, you know, more comprehensively why there is potentially no risk to the impact on water or no risk to the impact on communities and others. So really for us, the idea is to have through this platform, and you know, maybe I'll stop the share. There's plenty of ways. If I give you an example, that you can also, for example, decide on budgeting together with a community. Oh, it's taking a little bit of time to charge. Okay, how you can actually decide, you know, how to budget or participate on the strategy plans for the city or for the community. You could also go, for example, if I take another example on budgeting. If you give participatory budgets, so we actually shift it in terms of different districts or different areas for the communities, but have them choose, for example, how to put some funds that you provide for the community, whether you're going to be voting for, you know, a giant chessboard. So that's an example of what they had done in Canada here, or a crosswalk, for example, or renovation of the city hall. But that could be anything else, and each community actors can actually increase their choose their kind of budgeting for different expenses. The idea here was, the objective here, and I'll maybe stop sharing to have more of interaction, is really to be able to provide bottom-up information from the communities themselves, past the middleman of the 5-10 people that are very loud and very opposed to, let's say, mining projects, and then take 95% of your time when you have actually a public hearing, but really engage directly with each individuals of the community. Be able to highlight issues in the jurisdictions that, you know, in the vicinity of the mine that usually are not talked. So in the case of in Zamora Chinchipe, the issue of youth pregnancy, for example, or even domestic violence are issues that are very important. And we started seeing some of those comments alluded to that. So we brought in, for example, a psychologist, a webinar on psychology to be able to discuss, and people tended to look and listen to that webinar, for example, while they would have never talked about those issues inside the family circle or in the vicinity of the mine. So the idea is really to kind of map the SDGs and the development issues and provide the content on a weekly basis, together also with a local referendum to engage with the community. You can also manage small loans, for example, to different entrepreneurs every single time that you actually make a commitment with that small entrepreneurs into raising up their standards or trying to engage into a series of new products or new services. You ask them to, you know, upload some content, and therefore you release the next loan or the next, you know, kind of grant that you would provide them. But really be able to have a step-by-step, you know, follow-up and work with the different actors, building partnership and providing them also trainings and contents for them to be able to then also provide more services outside of the mining project itself, and diversify therefore the economy of the territory. I've already talked very, very fast on this, but I don't want to take too much of my time, and I'm happy to answer any question over the next hour before I run out to the airport. Sorry for this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Remy. That was brilliant. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the wonderful Remy. Brilliant. Now with this, Remy, I've got a question that's come in from John Clark, and he asks, how did you communicate the technically complex environmental issues so the community could provide informed concerns? So for example, how safe the tailings dam might be, etc. So how did you address that?
So usually when we work on projects, we have a team of 2 or 3 people. So we have moderator on the ground, and we have, a content provider. So every single week, it can be like an interview with different people. So that's the way that we engage on those issues. The possibility of having this bottom-up, approach means that we actually hear about the concerns ahead of time from the committee themselves, and then kind of actually discuss and provide the kind of content or discussion that is linked to it. The fact that it's a platform allows us not only to just obviously work with local actors, but also bring in, and actually I did it with you, Sarah, just calling you, different people that might be, international experts on those issues. If it's on tailing, if it's on water issues, if it's on commercialization of sustainable coffee, and they want to understand how to be able to provide, to get linked to the markets in Europe on organic products and others. This actually, whatever is the concern, whether it's a technical concern or it's more a business-oriented concern, you have, thanks to those platforms, the different ways to address it, whether it's through videos or through a series of different documents they can share with each of those actors. The key element here is really to get, kind of this closed door space only with the community, and not have the kind of negative interaction that you could get from outside, and try to tackle their needs individually, communicate on what you can do through those platforms, but try always to provide kind of a better understanding on key issues, or how to develop your business and mentor each one of them, so that you actually are a vector of change and entrepreneurship for your territory.
Great, thanks for that, Remy. So one final question, how does this compare to like a normal complaints and grievance system?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
How does this, could this be used instead of a complaints and grievance system? Would it fulfill those requirements?
So you can have a complaints and grievance system, for example. I mean, obviously included into it. That's not that is absolutely possible. But again, the whole idea here is not to limit the interaction with the communities on mining specifically, or on complaints towards mining. It is, part of the whole idea of having the mining company as one of the actors in the territory, and therefore really much more engaged into some of the concerns that they might have. For example, that might be, let's say, being worried to lose some of their employees that have been training for a very long time before they're getting better salary in the mining sector. The idea is to try to, move away from, mining being the center of all issues or all problems, and really talk about much more societal needs or societal issues, and therefore, quit the constant elements of, mining companies should be answering all my needs, and they're also the cause of all our problems. And trying to move away from this, outsource the conflictness and the management of conflicts on these platforms. And obviously, if you actually have kind of I wouldn't say like a peacemaker, or blue helmets, whatever you want to call them, kind of being able to limit and sort out those different complaints and discuss them openly and transparently on those platforms, and therefore only when you actually are trying to find a strategic plans to answer a specific concern, being able to make it on the 2-3 issues that gather most interest, and then debunk another one which is usually linked to rumors or others.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Remy. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic Remy. Brilliant. Our next speaker that we're going to this evening, I've no idea what time of day it is. It's going to be some time of day anywhere in the world, isn't it? So we've already heard from one Sarah, but why have 2 Sarahs when you can have 3? So ladies and gentlemen, next up, we have the fantastic Sarah Webber. And Sarah, I don't know if you're going to be sharing your slides. Now is a good moment to go for it. And Sarah is going to take us into the world of the S in ESG, building a positive and respectful Indigenous relationships for mineral explorers. So Sarah, I will let you introduce yourself. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It is a real pleasure to be here, and just like to thank everyone for tuning in today. I'm a geoscientist and work in community and Indigenous relations in the mining sector. Today, I'm speaking to you from the beautiful territories of the Coast Salish peoples, which is the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. Today, we also know it as Vancouver, BC, in Canada. So sourcing responsible raw materials, I think, really starts at the mineral exploration level, because to find them, to mine these metals, you need to find them. And if you're lucky, you'll find a discovery of economic significance. Across Canada, explorers are increasingly finding themselves being asked to actively engage with Indigenous communities. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls upon the corporate sector to act and adopt the principles of UNDRIP. And as well, here in British Columbia in 2018, an act was actually passed recognizing the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But everyone says mineral explorers run on venture capital, so they're not typically designed to have the capacity for ongoing and long-term engagement. But I think the time is here, this probably needs to change. Major mining companies, institutional investors are looking at the relationships established with local communities, part of their investment decision. So exploration companies need to budget the time and expense of developing these relationships, and it adds value to the projects. And after all, I'm sure we all know many examples where it was acceptable to explore for a mine, but it was actually not acceptable to actually open the mine. So the earlier we can de-risk these projects and engage with communities, I think the better for the entire sector. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, today I'm going to talk about why these relationships are important, some key principles of Indigenous relations, fostering positive relations, and touch on the first agreements that companies should sign with Indigenous communities. Positive relations are important from the very start. Engagement can strengthen the technical components of a project by incorporating traditional knowledge. Investors and the market can increase confidence in your exploration company. And Indigenous people can be the most powerful ally to a project, or as you'll see in these next photos, the biggest detriment to a mining project. And so why do these relationships often start so negatively? It comes down to history. There's been a lot of past injustices through negative government policies, treaties, administration. There's a long history of bad deals. And there's an external trust factor. Government and businesses come from outside the community. And what I found the community perceptions of some of the first meetings is that a corporation often looks a lot like the same as government. And government does not have a necessarily positive legacy of interacting with Indigenous communities. And there may be a negative legacy left behind mining specifically in the territory. In Canada, the residential school system tried to eradicate Indigenous cultures. There's unfair treaties, even where treaties are settled. There's limited land ownership and access to capital historically. Even the right to vote in North America didn't come into Canada for Indigenous peoples until 1960 and 1965 in the United States. We see 10 principles for positive Indigenous relations, and they fall into 4 categories: recognizing rights and title, respecting Indigenous peoples, committing to sustainability, sharing a common commitment and respect for the land and resources, and supporting Indigenous peoples' economic development. Recognizing rights and title. Many areas treaties are not settled, and governments have a duty to consult and accommodate. I encourage corporations to engage early with the community and get involved. It's important to recognize that there's shared and overlapping territories in many places. Historically, use of the land was often by more than one nation, and so your project may impact more than one community. And finally, consider the entire area your project may impact and the future project. That includes thinking about the downstream impacts. I know there's a lot of talk about tailings dams, but if you think about the infrastructure that might be developed, you need to think about engaging early with communities, whether it's downstream, whether it's access roads, whether it's the local port that might be part of a future development. Respecting diversity is very important. A lot of Indigenous cultures are very different from each other. In fact, in British Columbia, there's 198 distinct First Nations. There's more than 30 different languages spoken, and with that, 60 dialects. Recognizing that just like any community, there's varying interests and objectives. The community you live in, you don't agree with your neighbor. So you need to make sure that you respect that there are these diverse points of view and accommodate for them. And additionally, respect internal affairs and don't get involved in local politics by playing favorites or isolating critics of your project. In supporting Indigenous people's economic development, it's important to look where you can to support aspirations to secure economic development, to enhance capacity for training and employment, creating opportunities for procurement, and looking for opportunities to develop equity partnerships. There's many great examples of companies that are looking at aligning values through issuing stock options or warrants, looking at their procurement policies so that there is an Indigenous component in the bidding, and enhancing capacity for training and employment from the very early stages. And so how do you foster these positive relations? I mean, it seems pretty obvious: open, honest, consistent approach. And it's about communication. Most explorers have limited capacity and few employees. So don't create unrealistic expectations. When you're walking in and you're looking at your first initial exploration plan, you need to be clear that this is not a mine development, that a lot of jobs aren't coming, that there's not going to be a lot of investment in the short term, and the commitments that you do make sure that they're ones that you can live up to. Where I've also seen a lot of success is where companies create space for Indigenous input. So incorporating traditional knowledge. This may look like adjusting your exploration plans around wildlife calving season or harvesting or hunting. Perhaps you adjust your access to avoid a sacred site. And the more you learn early, the better you can plan for a project that may actually be developed. Take the time to learn about the community. I can't stress this enough. Communities are unique, they have different priorities, and don't make assumptions based on other areas in the world that you've worked. So it's really important to check your internal biases. There's a lot of opportunity to look at what local labor forces exist, history of other resource projects, and finding out about the community priorities. What you think may be a priority may turn out not to be one. I've seen this, it's very common. First impressions are very critical. You never get that second chance to get a project on the right foot. And it's an opportunity for a new owner. If you're coming in and you've just optioned a project or you're taking over, it's an opportunity to come in with a fresh face. And so some basic advice is listen and leave space for silence. Don't fill all that space, and leave space for the community to speak to you, and respect the cultural differences that may exist. An important thing for explorers to know too is that while, say, copper prices are hot right now, your project's generally not a priority for a nation that takes a generational approach to land stewardship. So don't rush, don't pressure communities, leave the time for space and communication. Now, in the past, agreements were left for the mining company and the company with revenue after all, because the company with revenue has the ability to form these agreements, create these incredible monitoring programs, look at training and employment. And so where does that leave mineral explorers? I mean, it's tough, it's very tough, but explorers have an opportunity to build community capacity and support for a project that, I would argue it will increase the value of the project. And so what I want to leave you with today is the first stage of agreements, because I think that's the one that's maybe the most misunderstood and maybe the least developed. I think everyone's familiar with developing participation agreements, impact benefit agreements, but it's this first one, communications and engagement agreements. So agreements come by many different names: communications, engagement, protocol agreements. They're suitable for early stage exploration. Some key components that you want to see in these agreements would be recognition of Indigenous rights, titles, and interests, respect of each other's parties' values and interests, and the communications protocols, which is who's going to be communicating, how are they going to be communicating, and when. So it's best to have some time set aside, at least twice a year during planning, and then after a program ends, provide an opportunity for community meetings. It's a great way to build capacity at the start of a project so that when later you're trying to communicate technical information, you've started to build a trust factor. So I hear these questions earlier in this session of, how do you communicate this highly complex tailings information? Well, it starts with communications at the start. You build a trust, you build a relationship, and you build capacity in the community that starts to understand the whole cycle of mine development. These agreements should include a review of exploration activities and information sharing, and often this information is very confidential. Communities often have sacred sites that they don't want the public to know about, and so there's got to be a real trust and respect. And sometimes it takes a while to learn about why a community wants you to avoid a certain area. So again, it's a good thing not to make assumptions. Making sure that you've got time or money set aside for cultural or environmental studies, which might be archaeological studies or wildlife or water, finding out about what's important to the community. They can be quite simple. They can be, a cultural study might be an understanding of where medicinal plants might be growing during a certain season that you want to, you want to locate a drill pad in another area. It doesn't have to be like early studies towards an environmental assessment process. They could be quite simple. Having a cultural or archaeological chance find procedure is very important, and making sure that your staff is trained on it and that the community understands that as well. It's good to have a commitment to that you will enter into further negotiations if your project develops, and that's a comfort level for the community. Communities will feel more comfortable understanding that you're not just, you're flashing in, flashing out, and that if a mine develops, that they'll be left out of the picture. So it doesn't, it can, explorers often are not the developers, but if there can be a clause in the agreement that there's a commitment and that this will be pushed forward to future owners as well. And then finally, capacity funding. And this is the part where you really, juniors need to budget for it. And the way I like to think about it is, what's the cost the leadership and community incurs that wouldn't be spent if your project didn't exist? And so that's, the base amount for capacity funding, as well as funding of possible technical studies or cultural studies that might need to occur. And so finally, time, trust, and respect equals increased synergy. I think early stage explorers can take specific action at the start of the exploration and mining cycle that will have a meaningful impact when it comes to sourcing responsible metals. And I would encourage investors and mining companies to be looking to value these types of agreements and efforts spent by junior companies. Thanks very much, Sarah. Really appreciate being here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. That's absolutely fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the wonderful Sarah Webber. Round of applause. Brilliant. Thank you for that. I have to say, I had no idea there were so many distinct First Nation groups in British Columbia just as an entity. That's amazing. So there's so much that I'm learning every day at the moment, but that was brilliant. Thank you for that. And also as well, going across into the trust and respect. So I posted a link to one of the talks from earlier in the week, which was one of the early session talks. So some of you may have missed it, from Rowan Thorne, who talked about his experience being an exploration geologist in Liberia. And as the geologist, actually, how much time you really spend with the community members, building that relationship right at the beginning of the project. So that's well worth listening to his story. And of course, there are many other similar talks that we can signpost that we've already heard through the week. But Sarah, a question for you. If you're the first group, for example, first exploration team into a community, there's an element of, you're never starting with a blank sheet of paper, because of course everybody has memories. But do you have any suggestions if you're going into a community that has been really hurt by mining, or they've been misled by previous organizations that have been in there? That's obviously a really difficult starting point. Do you have any suggestions with what to do?
I've been in those situations many times, certainly where there's been, a legacy of mining that hasn't been cleaned up, hasn't been cleaned properly, or communities where a mine has come in and you're speaking to an elder who recalls back in the 50s being promised jobs, and being moved off the reserve and for a tailings impoundment. And 2020 comes along and there's still not been a ton of jobs or Indigenous employment. And my best advice to those for those meetings is to take your time and to listen, and to try. You can apologize for the sins of the past, but it's about taking the time to acknowledge, make sure that you make the community feel understood and listened to, and then it's about moving forward and how to work together and do that in a better way. So I think that a lot of miners sometimes avoid those meetings because they're very tough, and there's a tendency for people to get defensive. But my best advice is to just go in with an open mind and listen carefully and take that input and make those commitments that you'll do anything within your power not to have that situation occur again. And you can make commitments, but it's keeping those commitments. You can sign an agreement, but it's implementing the agreement. That's very important.
And with those meetings, I mean, those the skill, as it were, or the empathy and the EQ in a way that is required to almost get yourself into that frame of mind before you walk into that room. If you are the exploration team or something, that's not a skill that is taught in geology courses at university, etc. Do you have any suggestions? Because, and I'm speaking as a geologist, sometimes you're in a team, and in that team you've got some brilliant scientists and brilliant technical people that, to be honest, if you brought them into that room with the local community, that might not quite work. However, they are the people with the technical skill and the accountability. Do you have any suggestions just in terms of how you prepare for that meeting, and who from the company side you perhaps bring into that space? Does that make any sense at all?
Absolutely. Engineers have a lot of technical information and they're very good at sharing it with each other. And sometimes you need a translator. You need a translator from somebody who can take that technical or scientific information and make it digestible for community. And one of the things I often think of is, if I'm trying to explain mining to somebody outside of the industry, can you explain it in plain language? You know, that's really the key. And it is important to take your president, your CEO, your engineers to these meetings. But the easiest rule to follow is make sure that you leave more than half the talking time for the community. There's a tendency for engineers, and I don't want to broad brush everybody, but there is a tendency for people to want to explain. There's share information and charts, and leave the technical data at home. Leave the maps. You can have maps, but make sure they're readable by. I'd like to make sure my mom can read the map, right? If my mom can't understand the map, chances are we're going to get some glazed looks over in the community meeting. These chiefs have to be experts on every resource on their land base, not to mention all the social issues that come with running a community. So the job of an Indigenous leader is an incredible job. It's got a lot of asks on their time, and so mining is just one of their files that they're dealing with. So, but yeah, going in and being prepared to listen is a key.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. And final question that's come in from John, and he asks, do you think the Canadian and BC governments are doing enough and an adequate effort with regards to this consultation? And he then goes on to ask what improvements you would suggest, but I'll stick with the first half of the question and let you address the rest in the Q&A.
I would say that governments are doing their best, but they are run by bureaucrats. So are they doing an adequate job? The communities I speak with would absolutely say no, they're not doing an adequate job. There's decades of injustice that needs to be unwound, and there's more that can be done. And in terms, I guess, of improvements, I think there's some leaning that the government does on corporations, but I think which is tough, and a lot of companies are finding it very expensive and thinking, well, that's the government's job. But at the end of the day, if you really want to move a project forward, you need Indigenous support, and you're probably going to be better at it than letting the government do that job for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Sarah. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together once more for the fantastic Sarah Webber. Round of applause. Brilliant. So we're going to stay in Canada, but we're going to move to the middle of Canada now, to Carly Becker. So Carly, if you want to come off mute and start sharing those slides. Carly is absolutely fantastic, and is going to still, of course, I mean, there's a lot of social aspects with regards to this, but instead move into the space of governance changing regulatory demand from an employee perspective. So we're going to move very much into that governance realm. So Carly, I'll let you introduce yourself, and off you go. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carly Becker, and I'm the head of product stewardship at Sherritt. I've been in this role for about 2 years. And the reason I want to do the changing regulatory demands is, from the start of my job 2 years ago till now, it's changed dramatically. And the mining world and regulatory demands are shifting at a very fast pace. So of the ESG, obviously I want to go into governance and into compliance. And the main reason is, without a mechanism for compliance, how can change be measured, right? So what I'm talking about there is, if we don't follow regulations, if we don't have standards, can we really hold ourselves accountable to making change, to showing change as organizations and as employees? And these types of standards I'm talking about are REACH standards, due diligence standards, red flag assessments, ISO certifications. And managing these compliance demands has put a pressure not only on companies, but has also increased the demands on employees to expand their roles as the regulatory changes happen. From the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these are 17 goals to transform our world. And I truly believe in that. Not only am I seeing that with other mining organizations and through seminars like this, but at our organization, there's been a dramatic shift in putting these goals first on our front. Not only the one that I'm going to talk about today, but also diversity and inclusion, something that is shown by Sarah being my International Women in Mining mentor. Companies are putting women in a position to lead and to have these opportunities to speak. But today I'm going to talk about goal number 12, which is mining and responsible consumption and production. Things that we're looking for in this goal are minimizing our resource use and waste, incorporating life cycle thinking, and collaborating inter and intra-industry. Having an understanding of our environmental and health impact of our products. And something we're doing to do that, or something Sherrod is doing to do that, is funding organizations such as the Nickel and Cobalt Institute to advance our ecological and toxicological sciences associated with our products. I've been to these meetings for the last 2 years, and some things that I've learned is the passion within the industry for the increasing the awareness of the potential health and environmental impacts associated with production, use, and disposal of our products. Not all of them are positive, but the thing is, we are making awareness to be able to help develop the appropriate regulations to protect human and environmental health. And that is a big shift. If we looked back on mining 50 years ago, you could see the changes that are happening, and that's positive. This big word map here, or word collaboration, is some of the things that we have to think of when we consider compliance. Continuing regulatory changes, enhanced monitoring and reporting requirements, increased regulatory scrutiny is some of the ones that stand out there. But from my personal experience, finding adequate and availability of skilled resources. And I can say that from personal experience, because trying to find someone to come into the role of product stewardship at our organization was very, very difficult. And luckily, my company pushed me forward from, I was in other roles such as minerals accounting and working out of the laboratory, and as well as doing internal auditing. They helped me develop with a mentorship to become this person within product stewardship. But some other organizations might not have that opportunity to drive from within, and finding these availability of these skilled resources is going to become ever more difficult as the regulatory changes happen throughout the world. Managing the increased workload from the regulatory demands, managing product lifecycle assessments, increased information requests from customers, the impacts of technology, such as working through COVID, and outsourcing obligations to ORs are other things we need to consider, among many, many others, as we could see. So, as I said, the role has increased dramatically through the last 3 years as a product steward, or material stewardship, as some people call it. And some of the things that have increased is the increase of REACH registrations from one organization in the EU to multiple throughout the world. We have to be able to track these demands and make sure that we're complying in order to be able to sell our product. Increased regulations on cobalt is another thing that is being highlighted in the last year or two. Responsible sourcing demands and questions from customers is something that increases every day. Trying to keep up with the world from an employee perspective is a hard task. our product stewardship team is currently one person, that'd be me, with the support of our sustainability and responsible sourcing group. But in the next few years, I can see these groups, not just in our company, but in every organization, growing dramatically in order to keep up with these demands. Some things that we've been doing as a compliance thing is life cycle assessments. This is a demand not only from our customers, but something that helps us with our regulatory compliance. So we participated in 2014 and 2020 cobalt LCA studies and 2017 nickel LCA studies. To me, these life cycle assessments is where we start asking ourselves as a company the hard questions, the questions that start driving change. Some of the things we can see from these studies is the potential improvement opportunities, providing these environmental information to clients, which has become almost a demand nowadays, and creating internal and external awareness of environmental footprint, as well as continuous improvement associated with our ESG governance criteria. So on this map here, you can see in the green dots or pointers there, these are where REACH-like registrations are already occurring. So it all started in Europe and it's spreading throughout the world. These orange are where the proposal stages are happening for REACH-like registrations. So as you can see, it's growing and it's spreading throughout the world at a very fast pace. Since I've started, we've already expanded into 4 different markets that have REACH-like registrations, and it's very difficult to keep up with them, as understanding the regulations in one area may not mean that you're going to comply in another area, as they all have different requirements, such as threshold bounds, data requirements, labeling requirements, reporting requirements. Understanding is very important to be able to sell our product and also to remain in compliance with these specific areas. Another thing we have to consider is the cost of compliance. And I want to say that this is an example of cost. This is the EU registration, and this is just a summary that was taken from online. But things that we have to consider is our substance identity. This cost estimate here depends on the complexity of our substance, so the analytical data. The information requirements are things like physical chemistry, toxicology, and ecotoxicology, and it depends on the availability of the existing data. Something I want to say here is this is constantly changing. As the regulatory requirements change, we have to invest more money into coming up with that toxicological and ecotoxicological data to be able to comply, and that's an investment for a company. Another thing we have to consider is our time. So our time as an organization, our time as employees is valuable. Putting this into a dollar amount, I don't know if that's something I want to do, but we invest a lot of time and energy and passion into our company. The cost of compliance is a large commitment for organizations. Another a compliance thing that has happened recently is the LME standards for responsible sourcing. In 2019, they released the requirements which align with the OECD due diligence guidelines, and they want producers to comply with it in 2023. This is a large demand in a very short amount of time, and for our organization has really put a strain on the employees and our responsible sourcing team. And we've actually expanded it to help meet these requirements because they require a number of assessments, including a red flag assessment, independent third-party feed audit, supply chain due diligence audits, the requirements of ISO 14001 and ISO 45001 certifications by the end of 2023. So putting this additional strain on organizations, although there are a lot of benefits, and this will help show proof that we are trying to be a responsible sourcing and responsible companies, it's high demands on companies to do in such a short amount of time. Luckily, we have other organizations that we can collaborate with, that inter-company or inter-industry collaboration, such as the Copper Mark Multi-Metal Standard, which involves the Copper Mark, the Lead Association, the Zinc Association, and the Nickel Institute, which we're part of, to make a joint due diligence standard to help us do the governance, the labor laws, environmental, community, and human rights. This is a great tool for us. However, there are so many tools out there to choose which form of responsible sourcing guiding you want to comply with and who you're going to follow. And if we choose to invest in the wrong program, we could waste a lot of time or money and have to repeat some of the work in a different standard. ISO certifications is another great tool that we are using, and it's an international standard that helps us align with QMS, environmental management systems, and occupational health and safety. However, it is also something that has large time commitments and requires yearly compliance. It's very labor intensive, especially if you're starting off, to create these programs and to ensure that they are up to date every year as things change. So in summary, the role of product stewardship is ever expanding, and compliance throughout the world is continuously changing. It's increasing into areas such as responsible care and sustainable development, and compliance demands are growing at a pace beyond that anyone could have imagined within our organization. Anyway, we've been mining for 50 years, 60 years, and right now is the time that the most changes happened within ESG, and we're happy for it, and we're excited as compliance are vital for compliance regulations are vital for improvement, but they do put a strain on organizations and employees. And that's everything.
Brilliant. That was absolutely fantastic, Carly. Brilliant. So ladies and gentlemen, if you please like to put your hands together, I was going to say your fingers together, your hands together, say a massive thank you to Carly. Becca, thank you very much, Carly. That's great. So there are a number of questions that are coming in for you. And I think something that really struck me was the reminder that actually this costs a lot of money for for companies to do, especially in terms of time and expertise. So a massive thank you for beginning to try and put a dollar value on that, because we've had a number of people talking to us about procurement, and especially a talk earlier on today where they said just fill in the paper because at the end of the day you have to do it. Now, from your perspective, Carly, and we've seen REACH encroach across the world, but then also there are all of the other requirements on responsible stewardship, etc. If you had a solution for people, what would it be? I'm imagining it is reducing the amount of paperwork that you have to do, but do you have any pleas for the world of procurement and regulation?
I would plead to the world that we follow a more regulated REACH type registration where we can use the same data, where we can use the same registration forms, and every country in the world could do the same set of data. Right now, in different countries such as Korea, we have to use their testing requirements. Whereas we already have the data, we already have the testing done for places like Europe or UK, but we can't use them. We have to do everything all over again. And that's something that is demanding on companies and financially a lot of money to keep up with, to keep within those markets.
No, it's absolutely huge. And I guess it, in a way, it almost determines which market, well, how many markets you want to sell into, and it has influence on that. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's definitely correct. The limitation, companies can only try to support countries that they can sell into that have enough revenue to be able to offset that REACH cost. And it really limits your markets if you can't register with REACH due to financial concerns, especially in smaller organizations and smaller companies.
Great, thank you. And there's one final question that's come in from John Clark, and he asks, do you see blockchain technology contributing to product stewardship, such as tracking the sources of products, etc.?
Yeah, so the life cycle analysis is something that we do already, and that's coming into demand more and more so from our customers, tracking individual product cycles and life cycles. And it will be continuously growing throughout the world as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we will be posting relevant videos that we've already managed to record earlier on this week. We did have one yesterday morning all about blockchain, etc. But please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together again for the fantastic Carly Becker. Thank you very much, Carly. Brilliant. And moving from the wonderful world of product stewardship, responsible stewardship, etc., across into that world of tailings dams once again. So, Nick, I don't know if you want to share your slides.
I'm trying.
It's okay. Yeah, they're looking a bit funny at the moment, but that might just be my view. It's okay. So Nick is going to give us a bit more insight into tailings dams. We already heard John mention them earlier on today, and of course, as he said, we have heard a little bit about them earlier on this week, including the Global Tailings Dam review. But without further ado, I'm going to invite you to please put your hands together for the fantastic Nick Arndt. And Nick, if you would like to introduce yourself and then get cracking. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, I'm Nick Arndt. In a previous life, I was a university professor, and I worked in petrology, chemistry, study of ore deposits. But then I made an excellent career move. I retired, and now I'm involved with this small company, which is called CISPRO, which does things totally different. We use passive seismic methods to study ore deposits and more recently tailings facilities. Now I've been following the talks, many of the talks in the last days, excellent talks, stimulating. And because of this, I changed slightly my talk. I was particularly struck by bursting the bubble, which I found very interesting, but also rather depressing, because we learned from the four panelists who came from different areas, unconnected with mining, what they thought about mining, and the opinions were pretty negative, moderately to distinctly negative. And I asked myself, well, what is this? Why do they have such a negative opinion of mining? Where do they get the information? Do they get it from, they probably don't read the technical papers, dinner party conversations perhaps, but more likely it comes from the media, the mainstream media, the social networks, and so on. And this led me to think, no, we don't have a journalist. I asked Sarah, is there a journalist? And we don't really have one in the conference. We have Ian Stewart, who's a television person, a television personality. And he gave an excellent talk, when was it, Monday, I think. Anyway, he talked about dialogue and co-creation, the need to tailor our communication to interested groups. And this is fair enough, but this is not talking to the journalists, the media. And I think this is important because if you followed BBC or French television or New York Times or The Guardian or whatever, the coverage of mining is largely negative for perfectly understandable reasons. A train that arrives on time is not news. The Lachine mine, which operated very reasonably for a decade, and now the site is well remediated. That's not news. Rio Tinto blowing up the Aboriginal caves, the mine disasters, that's news, and that's what's reported. And the studies have shown that if you ask people what they remember in the last month from news reports, they tend to remember the negative aspects, not the positive aspects. This is what we have to face. This is reasonable. It's important because another aspect that was stressed by many speakers, the very reasonable idea that local communities should have a more say, perhaps a veto, on where mines are sited. And where do they get their information? It will also come from the media of different types. Now, we're not going to change this. We're not going to change how the media does their reporting, but I think we can expect or at least hope that the reporting is accurate. And for this reason, and I think this is not always the case. So this is the main topic of my talk, tailings dams, how they fail and how they should be monitored. So here on the right, you see this remarkable, terrifying image of Brumadinho mine collapse, releasing this flood of tailings into the downstream area. Now there's some 3,500 tailings dams operating per year, and about each year, on average, 1 to 3 of them fail, causing many deaths, causing immense damage. And as in the global industry standard made one point that the current monitoring techniques are inadequate. This is all very true, and this is what I'll talk about later. But right for now, I'm going to talk about how these events are reported. So here we see, this is again Brumadinho and this flood of tailings which caused immense damage, destruction and so on. But in the reports, here's one from the United Nations Human Rights Agency said that new evidence showed that the collapse released many million tons of waste, which contained toxic heavy metals and toxic chemicals. And I asked myself, well, do iron ore tailings contain toxic heavy metals? It's a controversial subject. The representatives of Vale, which is their company, insisted that the mine is composed of sand and iron oxide and so on, is not toxic. But this is disputed by environmental groups who says that the opposite. And there's a paper published in Nature Scientific Reports that the tailings are composed of fine particles in the water containing a list of elements, iron, aluminium, and so on, which makes perfect sense, but zinc, copper, lead, and cadmium. And does it make sense there's high contents of cadmium in tailings? So I had a look, what's the composition of cadmium in tailings? There's not much data, but here's one. Tailings, as it happens, from Ethiopia, but the cadmium content is negligible. So I had another look at this paper, and what we see is this statement: levels of cadmium and so on are much higher. So this is their study. They analyzed water and particulate matter upstream from the dam, just below the dam, at various distances from the dam. And in this diagram on the right, there's distance as the concentration. Upstream from the dam, there are various concentrations of metals. Immediately below, the concentrations of many metals, iron and so on, are higher, and then it goes down to lower levels farther from the dam. But look at cadmium, which is really a nasty toxic metal. The concentrations just below the dam are high, but they're also high above the dam, which is surprising. Now, here's another study. It was done by also Nature Scientific Reports. This is about the Samarco tailings dam failure, also in Brazil. And they found dissolved metals here, and the enrichment factors in the sediments included iron, but also arsenic and mercury. And the result of this study is that the adverse effects come not only from the dam failure, but also from artisanal mining for iron and gold. So what this is telling us is that most probably the baseline studies were not done correctly. The other effects, the other inputs into the river system of metals was not properly taken into account. So I'm not going to belabor this too much. I'm simply going to say the toxicity of tailings, at least from the major dams that recently failed, Samarco, Mount Poly, Brumadinho, and Cadia. There, the tailings anything that got into the environment were not toxic. But nonetheless, we know that these failures caused immense damage to the downstream environment, to communities, to the reputation of the mining industry, and the risk of failings must be reduced. So how can this be done? So here's Cadia. This is the dam that failed. It released tailings, but not into the environment, just into the next tailings dam. Nothing got outside of here. What's interesting here is the study that was done in this technical report, the study which was done about the causes of the failure. And what we see, what was concluded, is that there's a low density layer in part of the dam, weak material, which failed under load. Here's another article from Science, which talks about the Mount Poly disaster, where part of the dam was constructed on a weak patch of clay in the foundations. The exploratory boreholes were not adequate to see this, and build other aspects here. And they also identified 4 factors which can contribute to the failures of tailings dams. One is liquefaction, which occurs when water seeps into the dam to reach a level at which the material becomes fluid and collapses. And this is one of the contributing factors to the Brumadinho disaster. Then there are 2 other factors which are related to construction of the dam. And the final one is shaking due to earthquakes. Now, our company, Sysprobe, together with EIT Raw Materials and Eramet, which is a French mining company, are looking into how we can monitor tailings dams using this technique, ambient seismic monitoring. We have one project which will start soon in a mine from Eramet, New Caledonia, the nickel mines, where tailings as such are not produced, but they can produce these piles of waste rock, which have to be monitored. They have to be monitored as the pile builds up and as more material is deposited on older material. Now, what we use there is that we deploy a series of seismometers like this. These are autonomous seismometers, which have powered by solar panels, which can operate for weeks, months, as long as we like. We use what's called passive seismic, which means we don't need explosions or vibro-sized trucks as an active source. Instead, we can use whatever sets the earth vibrating, ocean waves, trains, mine machinery, and so on. And the idea here is to monitor deformation in the waste rock piles. But what I want to talk about now is another system which I think is far more exciting. The idea that we can use optical fibers as sensors to different types of signals. Now, this is a collaboration between Sysprobe in France, with Silixa, which is a UK company that specializes in optical fiber technologies, Hydro Research, which is a Swedish company with a large experience in dam monitoring. Now, the idea here is we use these fibers, which are commonly deployed in dams to monitor various changes of conditions within the dam. They're commonly deployed to measure temperature, to measure strain, and so on. And yeah, we'll just go on. So these are the 3 techniques that are used. Our idea is to use optical fibers as a sensor to obtain 3 types of information. Temperature, which can monitor seepage of water into the dam, which can cause eventually liquefaction, but weakness in the dam. We use DSS, which monitors strain, deformation within the dam, and we use the seismic techniques, acoustic monitoring, which can produce 3D images of the structure of the dam and of the underlying foundations. So here's some data, subsurface imaging using the same cables as monitor strain and seepage and temperature and deformation. But here we have some seismic data. This is an experimental dam which is constructed specifically to test the 3 systems. What we see on the right here is a scale of velocity. Blue is low velocity, red is high velocity. And there are areas here which we imaged using the technique which show areas of potential weakness. And here's another type of image from another dam of the foundations beneath the dam. And again, Here, the green is low velocity, the red is high velocity. There's an area of low velocity which probably indicates a zone of weakness in the foundations beneath the dam. So this is the idea. For a dam like this, using the different techniques, temperature, strain, seismic monitoring, we can look for liquefaction. We can look at aspects of the designs which are questionable. We can look for deformation in an upstream type of tailings dam. And we can also monitor earthquakes. We can monitor the effects of an earthquake, the influence that an earthquake might have on a dam following a local earthquake. So that's it. Thanks very much, Sarah, and I welcome any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Nick. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic Nick Arndt. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. That's fantastic. Now, Nick, there are a couple of questions that have been coming in, which is great. The question from John Clark, and he actually posed this to John Thompson earlier, but I asked him if we could re-ask it to yourself, Nick, because he says, do you think geotechnics have veered away from Earl Cole's theory for safe mining or safe tailings dams in the 60s, when he championed the centerline and downstream method as safer structures using coarse tailings, unlike the upstream method? Is this the basic problem, and is it not being recognized? Even Cole Krippenberger say on their internet site, upstream only for arid and dry climates. Do you have any comments to that?
Well, I followed Laurie Rehmeyer's talk, early in the, and I think he expressed this very well. He said that, the upstream dams are very clearly unsuitable in many places. They're unsuitable in areas with high rainfall. They're unsuitable in areas where there's seismic hazard. But he also made the point, which is certainly made by people Australians particularly. They say that if in arid conditions, upstream designs are perfectly adequate and there's no reason to ban them. Now, I guess, that sounds reasonable to me, but maybe John, you have a comment as well, since the question was addressed to you as well.
Yeah, so please do feel free to engage in dialogue with the questioner, John Clark. But yes, Professor Thompson, sir, do you have a comment?
I don't respond well to that title, but anyway, I just want to re-emphasize the point I made in my talk, which is these are important technical discussions around how to construct the safest dams in a particular environment. And Nick's points are correct and so on. In certain environments, upstream are technically correct, but it's not just about a dam. It's about to do with the design of the mine, the amount of tailings you're going to produce, the life of mine. One of the major problems is mines is they're designed for a certain period of time and they vastly exceed that amount of time. And therefore the dam goes through long periods of construction and addition and addition and addition. And so whatever the original design is vastly exceeded by during the life of mine. And that's a system failure. That's not necessarily the technology of the original dam design failure. And so we have to take a much bigger view of tailings in the context of mining and in the context of people and people who are at risk, i.e. the communities, not just view it as a technical question, is upstream dams good or bad? Because it's not that is not the right question to be addressing, in my view.
Thank you for that, John. Thank you. And I think that looking at that broader context is so important. Certainly one of the last mines that I had the pleasure of actually standing inside it, they were really worried because they were running, the life of their tailings dam was rapidly running out. And actually they then just re-looked at their process flow and they were like, hang on a second, we're chucking all kinds of things into our tailings dam that doesn't need to go in there. We can just send it around our processing loop once more. And suddenly the lifespan of their tailings dam just grew rapidly and actually almost saved the operation. So I think you're totally right, John. This interconnected thinking in terms of looking at the mine in the broader context is so, so important. And perhaps comes back, Nick, to another question for you. Which is around that of people often ask me anyway about the risks associated with tailings dams and what are those controls or those critical controls. And one of the problems with tailings dams is that you can have all these fantastic monitoring activities, and you've showcased 3 of them within your talk, which is brilliant. But the problem with that is that you can do as much monitoring as you like. Unless you do something with that data, you're not controlling anything. because the control is actually using that information, making a decision and acting on it. I don't know if you'd have any comments to that. The danger being that you could just think that you've got something under control because you're collecting lots of data rather than then acting on what that data is telling you.
Well, I guess I'm going to talk boast a little bit about our techniques, because I think, they do provide some answers. There are two major differences between current monitoring techniques, which use basically point measurements, piezometers and whatever, water levels and so on, compared with the optical fibers, which provide a continuous measure of what's happening across the dam, within the dam. We can monitor the whole structure, particularly using the seismic methods, because the seismic methods produce an X-ray image of the entire dam. The other thing is it's continuous, it's real-time monitoring. So we can get a signal from the sensors in real time. We can see immediately if anything is happening. We can see if there's deformation in the interior of the dam, not at the surface, which many techniques monitor only what's happening on the surface. We can see what's happening in the interior of the dam in real time, and we can send an alert to the mine operators saying there's something happening right now. Go and look at it and see what's the problem. So this is our suggestion of how the whole situation can be improved.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nick. One final cracking question that has just come in from Amanda. And she says, I was under the impression that the new global standard on tailings dams was very good. Are you saying that it is insufficient?
Not at all. The global standard says that methods for monitoring dams must be improved. More completely, they say design, operation, and monitoring of tailings dam must be improved, and I agree entirely with that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the fantastic Nick Arndt. Thank you very much. Great. So moving from tailings dams, and we've been talking just now about seeing inside tailings dams using things like seismic, of course, which allow you to see what's going on within a structure or beneath the surface of the earth. We're now moving across to the fantastic Catherine McCallum, who I think is speaking on behalf of Heather De Quincey, because Heather unfortunately has been hit by that dreaded COVID thing, or at least there are reasons that unfortunately Heather won't be able to be with us. But Catherine, who you will recognise because she's already been with us earlier in the week, is phenomenal because she can do more than one thing. And so Catherine is going to deliver Heather's talk on her behalf. So Catherine, if you want to come off mute and start sharing any slides that you need there.
I will do now. Here we go.
Fantastic. Excellent. So Catherine McCallum, if you're thinking, yeah, where on earth did I see her? Well, on Tuesday in the second time slot in the afternoon, Catherine was part of the panel where they interviewed, or they answered questions from a social expert's perspective that were being posed to them by an exploration geologist. So Catherine, we've got the slides up there. Your name is Catherine, not Heather, but we can post Heather if you like. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the wonderful Catherine McCallum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Heather's actually joining us but not speaking, so I have left her name on the slide. So if you have any questions, please do write them in, and you might get instantaneous answers because I know she's actually in the audience today. So I'm literally the voice of this rather than I've been contributing to it, but Heather is the main sort of instigator behind what I'm talking about. So I'm going to be talking about SLOs, I'm going to be talking about remote sensing, I'm going to be talking about visualization tools. I'm going to be talking about the co-creation that happens when geoscience meets social science, and how social scientists such as myself are continuing to try and translate what we do so that it becomes understandable and not thought of as social babble, which is what my father, who's a geophysicist, calls what I do to this day. So to begin with, I'm representing Sazani Associates. Who are we? What do we do? We're a small name. We like to think we punch above our weight. We've been working in the natural resources sector for about I suppose, 10 years in a small way, sort of various different energy, oil and gas. Our roots are in sustainable livelihoods and climate change adaptation. We are community development practitioners at heart. We look at natural resources, natural resource governance, natural resource management. But we've been adapting our skills for the last 10 years or so, more and more towards supporting projects, technical support, research and innovation, training, which we've sort of now delivered training for geoscientists, where we used to do training for teachers and community development practitioners. And also sort of ESG risk reviews, just sort of doing due diligences and things. So we're an example of a not-for-profit organisation that has adapted really in terms of the climate and what's available, but also the industry and its realisation that they actually can learn from sort of the social and the international development sector, which is where we initially had our home. This project, which I'm talking to you about today, I'm just using the word of Sarah's conference this year. I think co-creation is the word of the week. And this project is co-creation in action. I'm going to be talking about two tools that have been developed by two different sets of research funding and how they've been melded or are being melded together and where we see this going. And I will come back to this slide at the end. Social license to operate. It's a thing, isn't it a thing? It's still incredibly contentious. People still say, we don't like it, we don't see its value. But at the end of the day, communities very rarely have formal ways of gaining or requiring consent. And it is the informal processes that continue sort of to be there. And it is the failure of engaging in informal processes that result in conflict. I call this social license. I think it's as political as it is anything else. One thing that has been shown by a lot of the research in Europe that I've been involved in through Horizon 2020, along with research in sort of numerous countries across Latin America and Africa, have shown that existing land use is what drives conflict more and more. And also the lack of understanding the social context. Sarah's spoken a lot about context this week as well. And again, it is about where existing land use and social context sit and how these together can support either the achievement and or the maintenance of a social license. Remote sensing, this is an interesting thing. Land use, remote sensing is used more and more and more in land use. And I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone here because I like using the products of this work, but I don't ever get to do it. And I never have actually done it. So this now I'm dipping very much into Heather's sort of world. But you know what remote sensing does, it can be used for determining what is there. It can be used for modelling land use change. And here you have examples of where it's being used. In this picture on the left is some actually research we did in Zanzibar in East Africa sort of a few years ago, where we looked at sort of land use change in terms of mangroves and how this affected climate change and climate change adaptation. We mapped over a period of 20 years the degradation of the mangroves there. You've got other examples here that if you want to know what they ask Heather. Sorry, Heather. And then we have this lovely tool which we've been developing, and it's been developed in a partnership with Aberystwyth University, with Geome, which is an innovation sort of fund that's also sort of Welsh, and also sort of quite an interesting partner who tend to focus more on defence work, but have been involved in a research partnership with Aberystwyth, and we actually got involved in it as well and received support. And this came from us as practitioners having an ongoing relationship with one of our local academic institutions, and them approaching us and saying, we've got this funding, we need an industry partner, we don't know what to do, what can we do, what should we do? And we said, well, we really see land use change as the issue, and we would like to map it. We'd like to map the change. We'd like to understand and be able to demonstrate this change sort of to the sector so they can see what's happened and why they need to prioritise these issues. And I went, okay, well, tell us more. And we sat down, we talked, we planned. They brought in their remote sensing specialists. We talked, we planned some more. And then Heather got involved and we came up with an amazing tool which I think the products are fantastic. How it works, again, Heather's in the audience, ask her. We call it our environmental ecosystems and evaluation mapping tool, and we use it to map change. We use it to map land change. We're working with a gold exploration project in Ethiopia at the moment, Akobo Gold, who are focusing on small scale mining and also trying to sort of just rethink how gold mining can work. Gold mining is important in Ethiopia because it's a country with very little access to foreign capital, sort of to US dollars. This is an area which is predominantly used by artisanal mining and has been for a long time. This exploration project's also been there for a very long time, and they're looking at how they can actually have a collaborative project, how we can look and combine environmental rehabilitation and conservation of ecosystem services and maintenance of ecosystem services alongside a small scale sort of gold sort of exploitation project. So to do this, we've actually been mapping land change. And this is the land change within the concession area over the last 10 years. And what we're looking at, what we're able to show is the change in land use. We're able to show where the artisanal mining is, where it moves, how it's moved. We're able to look at the water, where there has been water, being able to show that this area actually doesn't suffer from drought. Water is there and rainfall has been pretty much continuous over the last sort of 10 years or so. And its information is of use to us in terms of understanding existing land use and historical land use. So we're able to use that to project in terms of looking at sort of how to engage with the communities, with the artisanal miners. It's also of use to the project as well, in terms of looking at how they can sort of identify and use it in terms of exploration. Another tool that we've been involved in developing is our social license to operate index. This started with SRK when I worked there as one of their global social lead. It then moved to InFact, which was a Horizon 2020 project, through which we were able sort of to adapt it for a European context. And we got as far as looking at how, as well as understanding land use change, how human terrain can be mapped. And we got it to a level where it's a tool that's ready to be taken online, and it again shows the potential of social license and the potential of achieving it, but also the potential of maintaining it moving forwards. And it focused heavily on this whole notion of context, again the word that's been coming through this week. And we look at context through what people have. Not what they need, not what's there, but what people have. And we use something called the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework to understand the different assets that people have or have access to, then to understand how this can then be translated into potential risk, how this combines with regional development, how it combines with the practice of the company in terms of their relationships, and how it combines with governance. And by governance, we mean project governance, we mean corporate governance, and we mean the governance of the country as well. So looking at governance from every different perspective, and then all the relationships between those. So our co-creation is looking at, just this slide quickly. In terms of the social license to operate index, one thing we were trying to do, again, was translate social science so it's an understandable concept, and social license so it's an understandable context for engineers and geologists. And I know I've got a lot of you behind my screen right now, and I'm sure you will all agree, and it's been said to me, and we've actually verified it with a survey with more than 1,200 sort of geoscientists for the InFact project, that geologists like colours, engineers like numbers, social scientists like complex, qualitative situations. How can we bring the three together? And this is what we've attempted to do through this index. We bring the complexity of contextual difference, of relationships, of governance structures. We bring all of that complexity together, and we demonstrate it through numbers and colours, and we have resulted in an index which currently looks like this. But then we got thinking, what are the opportunities for taking it one step further? we have this land use tool. We are mapping land use change. We have that capability. We also have the capability to map the human terrain and to map the potential for change that feeds social license to operate. How could we bring them together? How could we visualize this? And we were lucky to be able to secure some funding from the UK Innovation Fund to try and build and extend this concept further. And what would it look like? So here are some prototypes of some of our thinking. Again, how can we bring colour in? How can we visualise risk? A lot of work has been done, and I think there's some talks tomorrow about it, but a lot of work has been done in terms of how you can use GIS and remote sensing and modelling. And I think most of you will be familiar with things like Leapfrog, which enabled sort of 3D sort of visualization of what goes on underneath the ground. But what about a 3D visualization of what happens above ground that could be used to speak to the communities, could be used to speak to the mining companies, could be used to speak to the exploration, could be used to speak to all stakeholders, could be used to speak to regulatory bodies, to understand and actually demonstrate actually what the potential risks are in a 3D visual way. And I think one thing we've learned more and more, especially this year, we can't travel to places. It's difficult. And so we're drawing more and more on these sort of innovative sort of remote sensing technologies that use sort of lots of sort of algorithms and other sort of creative and sort of quite funky stuff to actually to make a visual representation of the risks, whether they be environmental, social, governance and technical, and how these sit together. And this is what we're trying to do. So we've got it as far as concept stage at the moment. We are talking to some pretty big hitters, which scares me, quite frankly, in the world in terms of where we go next. We're also talking to some less scary bodies like EIT Raw Materials, who Nick mentioned, to look at how we can sort of get some startup funding sort of to take this forward as well. But we'd be really interested in hearing what people sort of in the audience today think. Do you think something like this would be useful to your project? What do you think would make a tool like this incredibly valuable for you? Are you already using something similar? Have you missed a trick somewhere? Is there someone else doing something? Because from what the conversations we're having, we're in quite a sort of quiet space. If there are people doing things similar, do you want to have a conversation? We would love to, because we have the ideas. But we realise that we can take it so far, and we would love to take it further. But we'd love to be part of an even bigger co-creation and collaboration to do that. And so that is my presentation. It was supposed to have been a lot more technical. I have sped through the technical bits because it's not my forte, and you don't want me sort of getting tongue-tied over things that I don't really understand. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. I've been Catherine McCallum for Heather De Quincey, and this is Heather's email, and I can answer questions that are socially orientated, and Heather can answer questions in the chat for the ones that aren't. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine and Heather, for that fantastic talk. So a round of applause from all of us on the other side of our microphones and computers. So I think, with regards to this, if you do have questions or if you'd like to get in touch with Heather or Catherine, I know that Heather can't talk at the moment. So I'm actually going to leave the questions in the written space. I was going to say virtual space, but this is all virtual, in the written space for the moment. But also as well, Catherine, you asked for any insight as to whether we've seen other things happening. So I posted it towards the beginning of your talk. Last year we had a talk from Gareth Morgan from Terabotics. Mm-hmm. They've been doing a lot of this for quite a long time. So I know that if Heather and Gareth haven't actually managed to speak yet, they really, 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 really need to speak, because there's some fantastic work that's been going on for ages now in terms of computer vision, but then also in the GIS space into the remote sensing that I'm sure Heather is very well aware of with regards to all of that. So that's a case where Gareth Morgan actually is going to drop in first thing tomorrow morning just to give us a bit of an update as to what Terabotics have been doing. Terabotics do everything. They don't have big funding that comes in from government grants. They've managed to survive by working in that, getting companies to pay for the product space, which is sometimes easier said than done. And so this is a case here where often their products really do follow what the companies are asking for, etc. as well. So it's well worth.
Do they have social scientists, Sarah? My
They
understanding
do.
is they're all geologists and geophysicists. Would I be wrong?
Not, Catherine. They do indeed have social scientists, and they've got environmentalists. They've got all of those different experts.
Then I think that'd be a very good conversation to have, just to understand, because, yeah, as I say, we've taken this to a level, and so we're having some conversations with some pretty big hitters at the moment as to how it could be taken into a more of a commercial realm. As I say, we are practitioners at heart, but we are very interested in how this space can sort of be taken, and also I think really for the juniors and definitely for the juniors, somehow for the mid-tiers as well, but for the junior and the mid-tier organisations that are looking sort of to understand but do not have the resources that sort of some of the bigger companies do. I think I think it's a good conversation.
There's so much potential with this technology, which is brilliant. And I think the more fantastic minds that are piling into this space, absolutely better, because what we've got loads of satellites and loads of different types of sensors that are up there. And the problem is nobody knows what to do with the data. So we've got loads of data collection mechanisms and actually a dearth of people who can use those data sets and, exactly as you say, Catherine, actually interpret them and know what they mean. So absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine and Heather. Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Heather and Catherine. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Cool. Now, next up, we have the fantastic Aileen. Aileen, I don't know if you've got a presentation that you want to share, if you want to bring that in. And so this is, we're kind of gone down out of the clouds. And in fact, Catherine was fantastic with that. So really saying, okay, how do we actually use all of that information that might be collected by satellites, etc. And we're now going to come very much into the people and the diversity space. So Aileen, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Thank you very much. And off you go.
I'm going to assume that everyone can see the presentation. And if it doesn't move, please jump in and let me know, because I definitely won't notice. So hey everyone, and I want to start off with saying thanks to Sarah and Rose for inviting me to talk at the Responsible Raw Materials conference. So my name's Aileen, and I'm actually currently a PhD, well, not actually anymore, I just submitted my PhD in economic geochemistry, which I looked at the Irish lead zinc deposits in the Irish ore field. So I've been studying with the University College of Dublin and ICRAG, so the Irish Centre for Research and Applied Geosciences. And since finishing the PhD and waiting for that whole Viva defense fun part, I've been able to start a project looking at the geology of the Zambian copper belt with ICRAG as well. So my background is very much economic geology and academia world, but today I'm going to talk to you about something that's a little bit different, but also relevant to all of us. And it's another project I've been involved with called the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in Geosciences Initiative, or the EDIG project, which hopefully some of you have heard about. So for the next few minutes, I'm just going to take you through what EDIG actually is, what we've been doing and why we've been doing it, and what you can do to get involved as well. So that brings us to what is EDIG. So EDIG is a volunteer-based initiative that aims to promote awareness of the challenges and experience of minoritized geoscientists and to promote progressive action to make geosciences more inclusive and accessible. So EDIG was started as a suggestion for a workshop on unconscious bias to our own research EDI committee. And this was after several of our own centre members experienced sexual harassment at a large mining conference before COVID actually, I guess it was right as COVID was happening. So really the EDIG project started as an internal EDI conversation that just kept growing and grew into something much larger. And since the world has moved to a virtual platform, really, I guess now over the last couple of years, we decided to expand the project outside of our own research centre and include as many of the geoscientists from the larger community in these conversations as we could. And so we decided to run a free virtual conference that was open to anyone. At this point, the project was still focused on gender-based discrimination, and that was where the majority of our own experiences lay. But as we started our own learning journey for our conference and our planning for it, we saw that these issues are often much more complex and that it's often just more than one component, and it's a lot really difficult to just talk about one aspect. And we learned that there's a lot of aspects that are really traditionally left out of these conversations, such as disability or socioeconomic status and the intersectionality of identities. So from there, we decided to expand the topics wider than just gender-based challenges and to bring these discussions together in one place. So as part of this, we decided to open up our committee and to run a survey to better understand the experiences of minoritized geoscientists, with a primary focus of informing and helping us to structure our online conference, where we could all come together and learn about these challenges. So for the next couple of slides, I'm just going to give you a short overview of the survey results and the subsequent conference we planned. So the EDIG survey was launched in the summer of 2020, asking people about their experiences or lack of with EDI related issues. So the survey was filled in by 708 participants from 58 countries, with the majority of respondents actually working in economic geology sector, which included both academia and industry. And while there is a huge range of information within the survey database, dataset even, the results really highlighted that challenges and other EDI related issues are still really prevalent in the wider geoscience community, including the mining sector and economic geology, and there's still a lot of work to do. So for example, while respondents did report that EDI initiatives were generally known about in their workplaces or organizations, most people were pretty unsure if they were actually effective or not. Yet 73% of respondents agreed that unconscious bias is an issue in their workplace or organization. And on top of this, over 70% of respondents have directly experienced discrimination in some form, including prejudice, inequity, bias, or exclusion, with while 86% of people have witnessed these type of incidents as well. And so these figures may not really be that surprising to all of us, but they clearly show the need for action and change within our community. And they also suggest that if you work somewhere that doesn't really seem to have any of these issues or not really talked about, that it may actually be that people don't feel comfortable enough to speak up in your workplace. And so in our survey, we also asked people to share their experiences, which were a crucial part in the planning of our conference. And while the main purpose of the survey was to plan and inform the conference, we now have a really, really powerful resource that we're planning to release as a report this year. But if you are interested to hear a little bit more about that survey and you'd like to hear a more in-depth review, you can go to our YouTube channel where Dr. Jess Franklin, who's one of the EDIG volunteers, goes into more detail on the demographics and the main themes that came out that were used to inform the conference. So that brings me to the conference. So the EDIG conference was run over 2 days back in December 2020, and we had 17 supporting partners help share information about the conference and have conversations with us about what to include early on as well. And so they're all listed here on the sides, and just really quickly want to say thank you to everyone for helping the EDIG conference get up and running as well. So the main event was split up into 3 sessions with 17 speakers on a wide range of topics, and it finished up with a workshop on unconscious bias that was co-sponsored by ICRAG and the IGI, or the Institutes of Geologists of Ireland. The sessions were themed around ideas of where have we come from, where are we now, and where are we going in terms of EDI and geosciences. And over the 2 days, we got to listen to the information about progress and diversity in geosciences, but also about the challenges and barriers to entry that marginalized geoscientists still experience and how this feeds into things like the leaky pipeline. We also learned about the intersectionality of these challenges and heard that due to this overlap, a lot of people are often excluded from conversations around EDI. And while we learned that it is all of our responsibility to become more aware of these challenges and that we all need to act to make geosciences more inclusive, accessible, and equitable. And I just realized I forgot to change all the bullet points, but here we are. And just as a reminder, so you can watch the survey videos, but we also recorded our entire conference on our YouTube channel as well. So they're either available as the sessions or as individual talks as well. So you can check that out on our YouTube channel, which is just called EDIG Conference. So that just brings me quickly to a little bit of an overview of what's next for EDIG. So while the EDIG conference was originally planned as a standalone event, we learned quite quickly at the conference and all the conversations that took place around it that there's still a lot of work to do. And so since the conference, we've been restructuring and rethinking the project. And as part of our restructuring and as a result of what we learned, we are going to change the E in our name from equality to equity to more accurately reflect what we stand for and what we're working towards. And this really conveniently does not change our abbreviation of EDIG at all, so that's great. So we're going to continue to promote awareness of the challenges experienced by minoritized geoscientists and to promote progressive action by providing a platform for us all to come together to make geosciences more inclusive and accessible. So in line with that, we're going to focus on 4 main strands, so events, networks, resources, and research. But right now, our main kind of focus is getting the survey report out, and we're also designing a website which will kind of mark the change of our name from equality to equity. And we want to develop our overall network where we're bringing different groups and companies in one place that we can all come together and learn about these things together. And lastly, as part of our research strand, we're also working on a collaboration with a group called Chorus, who have previously worked in other sectors outside of geoscience, like fintech industry. And they use a data-driven approach to look at unconscious biases and development of a charter for change for industries. And so we're planning to explore this within the mining and exploration sector with a similar aim. So if you represent a company or an organization would like to hear a little bit more about this, please reach out and we'd love to set up a chat. And our information is on the next page, which will just be at the end. So that brings me to, I guess, the last kind of part that I wanted to talk about, getting involved. And I think the first thing to say here, and I've already said this, but it's everyone's responsibility to take part in making geosciences more welcoming and accessible. You may feel that it's not really something that affects you, or that your workplace, it's not your place to get involved with these kind of conversations, or even that EDI issues are not an issue where you work. But we've heard from an awful lot of people over the course of EDIG, and we have data to back this up that show these issues are still present and we all need to be taking part in these. And as a result of these issues still being prevalent, we are losing an awful lot of people from geosciences. And what that actually means for our community is that we're losing diversity of opinions and experiences are being completely lost, which is a shame. And so there are a lot of different ways to get involved. But a really easy first step is to become more aware and to listen and to learn. And this is particularly easy to do now, I think, in our virtual platform where there's so many different webinars available and articles discussing the challenges of minoritized geoscientists, with many people sharing their own experiences. And so a few examples that focus on the raw material sector in particular are Dynamine, which is a podcast that explores gender and LGBTQ+ challenges, where Nicole, the host, speaks to several people from the mining industry about these topics and their experiences. And another one is Me Too Mining, who are working on sexual harassment in the mining industry, and they host a range of different resources, including the digger training on their website. And both Sue from Me Too Mining and Nicole from Dynamine both spoke at the EDIG conference, and there's videos on our YouTube channel, what they spoke about. And then also the International Women in Mining have an incredible amount of resources, from best practices to mining job portals, and they're pursuing gender equality in the mining industry. And another thing that International Women in Mining offer is they have a large database of female geoscientists and professionals. So if you want to organize events or looking for speakers, maybe you want a more representative panel discussion, reach out. They have the IWIM Speak Up database, and I think it's over 140 plus speakers registered in their database. And then lastly, just as a reminder, the EDIG conference videos are available on our YouTube, not to plug it again. But these are just a couple of the resources that are available out there for all of us to help learn and become more aware. But awareness is really only the first step. And while it's a really important first step, we all need to act as well. So we all need to come together and act to make geosciences more accessible and inclusive and diverse. But to do that, you really don't need to organize a conference or run a survey to get more involved. There's a lot of really simple ways to, depending on what your background is and where you're involved. So maybe you're organizing a seminar or an event, and a really easy step here is to just ensure diverse representation. And if you don't have any speaker suggestions, reach out to different groups like International Women in Mining or ourselves and ask for suggestions, because we can help and we know who to suggest, or we have a large database to suggest. And also think about accessibility from the start, in terms, especially for webinar series. There's been a lot of conversations around how to make your online events more accessible to people with different, maybe a visual or hearing impairment, or maybe English isn't their first language. And these are all really important things to consider when you're hosting any event. If you post on social media, including things like alt text or on images and captions on videos, can make your content so much more accessible to such a wider audience and community as well. If you're running a field trip, think about accessibility early on and provide things like a schedule early on so people can highlight any issues and know exactly what's going to happen. And I think really importantly is to listen to people when they tell you what they need to do geosciences. And that really comes down to just respecting one another. And if you witness discrimination, speak up. And especially in the moment, from our own experiences, that was something that happened and it really helped in terms of people coming up to us afterward, but speaking up in the moment would help a lot of people as well. So you can also join in with a lot of other groups who are really active in terms of these conversations. So here are just a couple, but also all of our supporting partners have different resources and different things that they're doing to be more active in the geoscience community and thinking about EDI topics. And lastly, just gonna plug, if you want to get involved with EDIG, we're very close to opening up our committee to new volunteers. So, but also if you represent a company or organization that you'd like to get more involved with and join our network that we're developing, please reach out to us, send us an email at edig@icragcenter.org. And I believe that is everything for now, so I'll stop sharing my screen.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Aileen. That is absolutely brilliant. So round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, from the other side of your muted microphones for Aileen and everything EDIG. Brilliant. So this is something here where the EDIG conference that, as Aileen mentioned, and yes, just in case you missed it, everything is on their YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch that, just in case there's not enough YouTube available for you. It was an absolutely phenomenal conference, Aileen, and I was hugely honoured to be able to help facilitate one of the sessions. And I have to say, from a personal perspective, it was probably the most challenging facilitation that I'd had, purely from a personal perspective, because actually working out how do you talk about diversity and almost summon up the courage to ask those questions that you think you should actually have the answers to already, poses a, for me personally, anyway, quite a big barrier, and I think I'm probably fairly normal in that. Do you have any suggestions on how to help people actually ask those questions that in some situations might appear to be really rude, but like, how do you get over that barrier of engaging in conversation and finding out what somebody actually needs in order to be able to move forwards?
So great question. Yeah, actually, that was something that came up in our conference, or the workshop on unconscious bias, which isn't up on our YouTube yet, but it will be over the next couple of months. And that kind of came up in the session about awareness of challenges as well, because often there's a lot of terminology that people are really scared to use, and so they just tend to avoid it. But I think part of it is just being open to learning and realizing that you not knowing everything doesn't actually make you a bad person. Like, the amount of times I've called my own unconscious biases out over this journey, it's been a real learning journey personally as well. But it's just, I think, being open to learning. And right now there's a lot of really great resources that the people from marginalized communities have already put out for us to learn, who are in the majority, different articles talking about what they need and language barriers and things like this. But I think it's just about coming at it with open mind, and patience really helps.
And I guess, I mean, is this something as well where don't be afraid to make mistakes?
Yeah, I think so. I know from my own experience, I accidentally ended up chairing that unconscious bias workshop, and there was a word that came up that I couldn't even pronounce, which I think was good in setting up that this is a very safe environment and that it's okay to make mistakes. And I think maybe it's about doing it in a way that's like clear you're trying to learn rather than just demanding the answers, because it's not really up to the people in minoritized communities to keep giving us all the answers to the same questions that they keep getting asked. They've already answered these questions, so I think it's a little bit on ourselves and the majority to go find out as well.
Great. And I think, I mean, with that as well, I mean, certainly I remember speaking to my parents after the conference, and my dad was just, he didn't even know where to begin, because he was like, and it's things as well. So if you're trying to describe a person and you're looking at them, and I can see how you look different to me, but I don't know what words to use. All of that, you know, it is that barrier to entry, and as you say, being open to learn and really listening to one another as well, and having that empathy for one another. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with Zoom meetings as well, there's been a lot of conversation. So I've learned a lot on Twitter, and like I know that people say an awful lot of bad things about Twitter, but we've been really lucky that it's been a really positive, engaging community. And anyone who did like call us out for anything, because we were learning ourselves, we did get called out, and it was great because those people took the time to have conversations with us and tell us what we could be doing better, especially coming from the point of view of trying to host a platform. But yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations recently about people just completely disregarding pronouns and things like this. And like in Zoom, a lot of people put pronouns literally beside their name, and to have them completely ignored over and over it's not really okay in any way. So I think it's just people just need to be a little bit more respectful of everyone around them as well.
Great. Well, with that, thank you very much, Aileen. Absolutely brilliant bringing that to us today. And congratulations, a massive congratulations on what you guys have pulled together over the past year. So round of applause for Aileen. Absolutely brilliant. Now we're almost there, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to come into our last formal talk before we bring in Tom Butler to help us sum things up for the day. And I can see him writing lots of notes, which is brilliant. He's thinking, Sarah, watch it. So our last speaker before we go to Tom is the absolutely fantabulous Rob Carpati. Rob, I don't know if you've got slides that you're wanting to share, or if you're just going to speak to camera. Now is your moment to start sharing those slides. And Rob is going to be speaking to us about measuring the benefits of social engagement. So yes, there has been a fast and furious social theme with regards to today. And I don't know if it's just me, but have we just lost Rob? Is he still there? I'm not seeing Rob anymore. I think we may have accidentally logged out of Zoom instead of sharing slides. No, he's back. There he is. Fantastic. Rob, do you have slides to share?
I am still here. I do have slides, and for some reason, when I tried to share them, it didn't work.
It didn't work.
Everything is fine.
So Rose has a copy of your slides, Rob. So I tell you what, if Rose shares your slides, and then Rob, you can get cracking by introducing yourself and then saying, next slide, please, Rose, when you want to go to the next one. Thank you very much, Rob.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. So I really appreciate Sarah and Rose the time on this process. What a fabulous set of sessions. And I'm really honored to be here, actually. So I am the VP Strategic Transformation of O-Trade, working with the team around growing and around adding finance capabilities. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about what does measuring benefits of social engagement mean. It's really business cases, it's really after the fact measurement, and it boils down to what is a common language all about. Because you've got sustainability people, you've got mining leadership, business leadership at a corporate level, and finance people that all need to come together around common assumptions, common language, to be able to figure out what's the single version of the truth. And that's what measuring is all about. It's a single version of the truth. If you can go to the next slide, please. So at a real basic level, the starting point is social engagements an investment. It's about a mining operation working with the community, building trust, social license being obtained through the trust, and turning potential conflict into collaboration as they do that. So it's an investment. If you hit enter, please. So O-Trade's been doing this for close to 20 years at this stage, and we've got experience in lots of engagements working with lots of mining companies and their neighboring communities on solution design look like? What's a win-win look like when conflict becomes collaboration? And when we think about measuring that, we're talking the impact of that. It's really, what does 2 + 2 = 5 look like? So if you hit enter, please. So we manage what we measure. Hit enter, please. And managing what we measure means a few different things. Like, why do we care? Well, it impacts the corporate bottom line. A mining company's gonna make more money when social engagement's right, and measuring helps bring it all together for managing purposes. So there's more money made a couple of different ways. So our earnings grow, productivity grows. And it's really all about putting heads together between the company and the community to figure out the best solutions around productivity. And more productivity means more money. It means less risk too, because all of a sudden everyone's rowing in the same direction, oars in the water, same way. Less conflict, less PR risk, less legal risk, so on. So it's really everyone all together. And the business case, it's what brings it all together. It's the notion of, what are we gonna do? What's purpose? What's strategy? What are the detailed tactics? How do we adjust when we need to based on the measurement, based on the progress, and making sure everyone understands that the same way. Because it's one thing for a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet, who cares? It's a whole other thing for a social engagement team, for mine leadership, for the overall company to have the same picture on what this is all about, what are the steps, and how does it all come together. If you flip, please. And again. So there's also a variety of stakeholders who care about this work, and all for good reasons. So investors, well, what did we just talk about? Less risk, more money. Investors like less risk. Investors like more money. So investors are demanding, expecting and demanding, and starting to validate, what does social engagement look like? Is the right work happening in the right way at the right time? And investors are funding companies more, mining companies more, that do that work, and they worry about companies more that don't do that work. So the cost of capital is different, the access to capital is different. Downstream customers care. It's one thing to get a mineral out of the ground, it's another thing to sell it. And we're selling it maybe to a large OEM of one kind or another that makes some product. And those companies get it. They get it that the risks upstream, starting at a mining level, become their risks. If there's any instability, if there's any conflict, if there are human rights issues, and so on. The reputation of the mining company as their supplier becomes part of their reputation. And next page, I'm going to talk about that a bit more. And customers care, and it's not just millennials, but it is millennials for sure and beyond. Because ethically, it's about the combination of doing the right thing and doing the smart thing at the same time. So ethically driven, the idea of, number one, we don't want the earth to be burning. We don't want people to be treated inappropriately. So the notion is, if a company's doing the right by those things, then their product's more valuable. There's more value to the end customer who cares. And the very last thing, and it's cut off on my page, but hopefully everyone can see it other than me, is employees care. If a company has a purpose, let's say a mining company, and part of that purpose includes engaging with the community and respectfully building trust and building collaboration, that's cool if you're an employee. It's an image to tap into, to be part of. So all of a sudden, sure, you get a job, you're making money. That's a good thing. But you're also tapping into that ethical image, which makes you feel good about what you're doing, excites you, and makes you want to give all. So there's a whole variety of stakeholders for different reasons who care. So if we flip again, please. So this is one example, and it's Phillips, really, and they have a conflict minerals report. And the point is, they get it. They've got a complicated supply chain ahead of them, and they understand that they either know or ought to know what's happening there. And they report on it from a social engagement and ethics and environmental point of view. It's part of their report. So what does it mean? Well, they have standards. They expect and demand those standards. And it also means that they audit against those standards, starting at a mining company level all the way through till the product hits their operation. So it ends up being a single version of the truth in terms of who's doing the right thing, where are they doing it, how are they doing it. If you can flip again, please. And again. So a lot of words here. I'm not going to read every one, but there's a few points worth making. So this is normal finance work. It's what finance people do when it comes to building business cases. And a company point of view and a business case is different than a community point of view. One is return on investment, the other is social return. From a company point of view, it's all about, well, what are the risks and opportunities? So opportunities being collaboration, putting heads together with the community, and who knows more about what's happening on the ground than the folks who live on the ground. So it's applying that knowledge to make productivity as good as possible. Bang, money, business case. And lowering risks as well. What's the probability of conflict when there's good engagement? PR hits, legal hits, land access permit issues, so on. When there's a shutdown because of conflict, wow, the opportunity cost's huge. And you can think about what does that look like from a business case point of view. And when conflict turns into collaboration, that 2 + 2 = 5 happens, that risk goes away. Or gets real small anyway, and gets replaced with collaboration where it's productivity all of a sudden happening. So benefits instead of cost, ROI. And from a community point of view, it's social return. And social returns, same work, different view of the world. It's what does it mean to the community? Part of it's concrete economics, part of it's subtler and more quality of life oriented work. So concrete economics are things like direct employment, local procurement, putting a dollar into the local community, which then gets spent, people get benefits from. It's measurable, easy to measure. But the quality of life things, what's the value of education or water access or better infrastructure? Again, thinking through what does that mean? What's the effect generated by that and how does that monetize in a reasonable way is what the business case is all about. So same work, 2 points of view around benefits, 2 points of view around the bottom line, ROI and SROI. And the investors care about both because they want to see the money, show me the money, but they also want to see the lower risk. And they understand that there's lower risk by doing the right thing with the community. So if you can flip again, please, Rose. So it's natural finance work thinking about these business cases. So from a corporate point of view, it's that single.
I think we've maybe lost Rob briefly. I'm going to hope that there we are. We're back. Sorry, Rob, we lost you for about 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Funny how these things work. Yeah, so it's basic finance work when you think about businesses. That's what finance people do. Whether it's a new mining operation, whether it's a new route to market, to engage the community, what's the likely outcome of that? Lower risks, higher productivity. How does that suss out in corporate financials? Time-bound probabilities, meaning how long is it likely to last and how big is it likely to be? And it falls into good old-fashioned accounting principles, financial principles. Materiality, we all hear the word, but it's also things like being realistic. It's a conservative, relevant, reliable. It's the stuff finance people think about every day. It's making sure everyone's aligned on assumption. It's the idea of, it's one thing for an accountant to build a spreadsheet with an ROI. It's another thing for the sustainability team or the broader business team or the community to buy into, here's what that's going to look like. It's the cross-functional language which drives that. And the last part from a company point of view is terminal value, which is just a fancy word for how long are the benefits going to last. Then from a community point of view, if you hit enter, please, it's the same basic principles if you can hit enter, please. It's the same basic principle. It's causes and effects. We're going to do something from a mining company point of view. Something's going to happen in the community. How does that all map out and dollarize? The couple of extra things that are a little different here. One is the notion of normative valuation. So what that is well, what is the value of a new road or better water access? Hard to put a dollar amount to it. There isn't a naturally accepted standard, maybe. So it's coming up with the most decent assumption that's possible given what you're doing. And there's also resources to look at to find these normative valuations. Things like the Global Value Exchange or the World Bank ESG database. But it's really taking things that are soft benefits to a community and trying to figure out a hard dollar amount based on a reasonable assumption to it. Then from an investor point of view, if you can please hit enter again, thanks. Investors care about the combination of the two. Show me the money plus purpose. So purpose, they can't necessarily know they're hearing the full story when it comes to reporting. So it's going below the surface of company reporting to understand, is the board of director tied into purpose? Are they sponsoring it? Are all the decision-making processes, the business culture, so on, bought into the sustainability thing? And does it suffuse the way they make decisions? Because if the answer is no, then the story isn't real. And investors know that. If the answer is yes, then the story is real. And investors get real interested real quickly because they understand the benefit of it's going to be happening. If you can please keep going. And again. So the reporting we have today, we all know there's a lot of standards. Alphabet soup, SASB, GRI, ABCD, EFG. They're all different. Ratings are subjectives, and convergence is happening, but it's going to take time. Will impact weighted accounts be it? Maybe, possibly. We're not there today anyway. So the interesting question, what are investors doing in the meantime? Because they got to look below the surface. So one's the deep dive that we just chatted about. It's looking at purpose and the application of purpose. It is the company living the dream that it talks about living when you look under the covers. If the answer is yes, great. Audit and assurance is another part of it. Companies are thinking about it more and more. And what does that look like? Things like the World Gold Council with insurance engagements. It's getting someone to stare at the company in detail and see, are all the right standards there? Are they being deployed at the right time, in the right way, to the right effect? And the last part's targeted validations. It's the idea, go in, ask the right questions, and make sure with the quick in and out that the story holds together, that it makes sense, that the company's doing and thinking about the stuff that they say they're doing and thinking about. If you flip, please. And again. So if we think about a validation, O-Trade has an offering, the 360 Rapid Assessment. Now I know Monica Espina was talking about this a little bit the other day, but the starting point for a rapid assessment, whether or not you're in a corporate head office of a mining company or whether or not you're an investor, how do you know the story's real? How do you know what's really happening? Because it might even be a good faith story where everyone's telling what they think is the full unadulterated truth, but they don't quite understand something. So how can you find out? That's what it comes down to, the 360. And how can you lower your own risk by finding out? Whether you're a corporate head office with a remote mining location halfway around the world somewhere, or if you're an investor thinking of buying into a company or investing in a new startup mining operation. It's the notion of understanding what's real and what's Memorex on the ground, so you can make targeted decisions based on that. So the way that looks, if you flip to the next page, please, and it's largely driven by 20 years of in the field knowledge. It's what Monica Espina calls insect bites. It's really going in and spending a few days asking questions. Tell us a story. Tell us a story when it comes to environmental things, social things, governance things. By the way, show us as well. It's one thing to tell us, but show us the analysis you just talked about. And we're going to stare at it. We're going to analyze it. And based on 20 years of experience, come to conclusions which we'll be able to report on, good, bad, or ugly. And here's the picture in a GRI-oriented way and lined up against SDGs, where here are the risks. Here are the things we need to worry about. Here are some possible conclusions. And it takes only a few days to do this because it's really based on all the knowledge that's out there. So you think about all the topics that go into play. Artisanal mining. Well, it has environmental aspects, obviously. It has social aspects, has governance aspects. All of them come together, which is why you've got to hit it from a full end-to-end integrated point of view, going through the color wheel, sort of a picture that's there to understand the reality. Same with water access. Water access is a social issue at the end of the day. No water, well, that's a problem. But water is an environmental thing as well. And by the way, how's water access governed? Same with every single topic going through this. So it's a fast and effective way of trying to get below the surface to see what's real, what's Memorex. So if you flip pages again, if you can flip pages again. Uh-oh.
So I think
Rose?
maybe go back.
Hello?
I think we've got a delay between Rob and ourselves. Rob, we're looking at the bottom line page at the moment, if you're still there.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. I lost it first. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, no, we can. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, Rob, we can hear
Fantastic.
you. We're looking at the bottom line page.
Fantastic. So I'm going to bring it all together because at the end of the day, a business case, it's about a single version of the truth. Social license, it's a smart investment. It brings returns. It's about turning conflict into collaboration. But what does it mean? What's the strategy? What are the tactics? And how do people understand it the same way, whether it's sustainability, finance, business, operations, or anyone else? That's what the business case is all about. And that's what measuring is all about. And that's what finance does every day of the week. Whether it's a new operation, a new route to market, or sustainability. There's no reason it shouldn't be done for this. And it better be done for this because investors care at the end of the day because they get it. There's money to be had, reputation to be gained or lost. Guess what? They don't want to lose it. They want to make it. So that's the bottom line. And that's why verification matters as well. Things like the 360 assessment and things like assurance, because it's getting below the surface and seeing what's real. So if you flip to the very last page, thank you very much. That's my story. If anyone wants to hear more, you can connect with any of us at O-Trade. There's my email or our website, and we'd love to talk more. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Rob. So from all of us on the other side of our microphones, thank you very, very much. That was absolutely brilliant. Now, in the interest of time, and also given your internet is a little bit patchy, I'm not going to pose any questions directly to you now, but there are questions. So, for example, Catherine is asking, what do you think to a triple bottom line in the chat at the moment? So please do answer that in the chat. But instead, I'm going to go straight to Tom Butler because we have hit 6 o'clock. But Rob, that was truly brilliant. And I think for me, almost the kind of the interpretation or the translation of social into finance speak. That is genius. That is absolutely fantastic, and something that certainly I will be taking away and making use of. So thank you for that. So I'm going to leave Rob to answer those questions in the Q&A and also in the chat, but invite our other panelists, our other speakers, to turn their cameras on so we can see all of your beautiful faces. Thank you very much. I could just leave Catherine and Rob to have a chatter, because actually that's a brilliant question, Catherine. Maybe we can come into it in a second. But I'm going to turn to Tom Butler first, because he has been sitting here throughout. Well done, Tom, with all of that. And I suspect you have some reflections that you would like to give back to us.
Yes, I do. Yeah, thanks. And thanks very much for inviting me to what's been an incredibly interesting afternoon. And you've collected a really nice mix of speakers with a really interesting set of topics. So congratulations. And it was a very sort of enjoyable way to spend the afternoon. I thought what I'd do is two things. One is a very quick, elevator pitch. So if I was asked in the elevator, well, what did you hear this afternoon? I thought I'd just run through sort of the key things that I took away from each speaker, and then reflect on one or two of the sort of connecting themes. But I'll try and do it relatively quickly so that we can have a chance to discuss. So elevator pitch. Well, if you ask me, well, what did I take away this afternoon? Just running through the speakers. So Sarah number 2, whose surname I think is Kavan. I think the most interesting thing that I took away from that was that the point she made about how finance is now coming at this ESG challenge and innovation from both ends. So we've always had sort of people who are interested in impact finance, but now we've got coming from the mainstream side. For the first time, really, investors across the board are showing really significant interest in ESG and driving that. John highlighted the scale of the challenge. He gave us a good example of progress, which of course I was connected with. So thank you, John, on the tailings standard. He also gave us a good example of how we slipped up and dropped the ball last year with Juukan Gorge. And I think he made an important point about how we need to think about the whole supply chain, not just the mining end. Given the fact that so much is going through China and so much is being processed in China, we need to think holistically about responsible supply. Sarah, number 3, whose surname I think is Weber. The most important point I think I took away from that was that, which is so often forgotten, especially by junior companies, is the need to budget both time and investment in relationships. And I'd like to come back to one other point that she made when I sort of talk about the sort of connecting themes. Remy, I think, gave us a very good concrete example of how to do that, how to invest time and money in managing those kind of relationships. Nick gave us an example of where there's room for progress on tailings, and I think the point that he made on media was interesting. How the media picked. He had claimed that the tailings were toxic, which was, you could argue it either way depending on how you define toxicity, I guess. But I think more importantly, as he said, bad news travels faster. We just need to make sure we have far less bad news in our industry if we're to regain our reputation. Carly talked about product stewardship, and there was a little bit of angst, I think, in terms of the number of different standards that she's having to deal with, and perhaps it's incumbent on us. And John did sort of query whether governments were playing a proper role, perhaps on governments as well, to play a role in consolidation of some of those standards. Catherine talked about the Sazani social license to operate model and how to visualize it depending whether you like colors, numbers, or diagrams. And I thought the integrated model was very nice. And hopefully you'll get some volunteers to collaborate with you on the next steps there. Aileen talked about, I may have got the pronunciation wrong there, but I think you talked about a critically important subject. And it's not just, by the way, important to get right, but it has been demonstrated through evidence, concrete evidence, that if you can get your diversity and inclusion right on teams, you can be more productive. So the message is completely aligned with delivering a better bottom line, whether it's a single bottom line or triple bottom line. But there's no disputing the evidence there. And I think you also made a very important point, which is about how we need to have respect for each other, and that's at the heart of it. And I think that translates across into more than just inclusion and diversity. And then Rob, last but not least, you made a compelling case for measuring the social return as well as the investment return, and how how if you can make that case and demonstrate it, it's sort of linked to lowering the risk for investors. And I think your quote about managing what you measure is well taken. And I think you also perhaps highlighted some of the complexity of getting that right. That to me is the fascination of the sector. And so just a few of the sort of overarching themes which I drew out of that. The first one is the interconnectedness of everything we've been talking about today, and just to pick up on one or two of the points that came up on tailings. We learned this going through the development of the standard. Previous attempts at managing tailings have been very sort of technically focused. The independent panel came at this from a very different angle, and they said this has got to be people-centered. And for the first time, environmental and social considerations were introduced into a tailings management standard at the global level. But what was also interesting was the investors were at the table as well, and investors were driving this. And this was the first time that investors had shown so much interest in, and wanted to get their hands dirty, basically, in how this industry is managing its business, which is an illustration of how their reputations are on the line as well, and they feel that. And Yukon Gorge is also an example of that, because some of the lessons coming out of that are about how the decision making needs to be much more integrated, and how companies need to get much better at transmitting critical information upwards, and sifting the information, which is critical, which isn't. This needs to go up, this doesn't. And those lessons were also very evident in Brumadinho. And then the other thing about interconnection was how the decarbonisation agenda is being driven by ESG, but at the same time we have to get the ESG right. So there's a sort of circularity there. I think your question, John, about whether governments are focused enough is right there. Governments need to help us through this. The private sector has been leading on a lot of these topics, but governments, I think, need to play a bit of catch up. And I think some of the points that Sarah made on social license, to do with the potential for shared value and the importance of context, are also, point to the interconnectedness of everything we do. And I think Rob's just been speaking to that as well. And then the second theme is, which is related to interconnectedness, but not quite the same, is complexity. We've had so many different standards mentioned just in 3 hours today, LME, OECD, ISO, GRI, ICMM, and then of course the alphabet soup that Rob mentions in terms of evaluating the SRI. And there is a clear need for consolidation. There was a question asked about which ministries sign off on social license to operate. There's a clear need for consolidation, a clear need for governments, and maybe some kind of supranational entity to, if it doesn't exist already, to be created to oversee some of this, because we're facing a critical challenge in the next 10 years, and we can't just leave everyone to muddle through. And then the final point to make was that there was very much through the afternoon an emphasis on the S in ESG, the social aspects, not just communities, but rightly so, an emphasis on Indigenous peoples, the need for engagement, co-ownership, alignment, and the point that was made about when you engage with Indigenous people, a need for an honest, open, consistent approach is well made. But it's also incredibly difficult because, you know, when you're an explorer and you're going in there, you don't really know what you found. You don't know whether you're looking at a 10-year asset, a 100-year asset. You know, you can't be completely open and honest because you don't really know what you've got. You're having to explain very difficult concepts. And then suddenly, you know, your junior gets acquired and hands change, and all of a sudden the Indigenous community is dealing with a completely new entity. And I think so. One of the points that I think I would make in reflection on that is the need for kind of induction, onboarding when you change hands like that, but also you know, really good record keeping, really good handover of relationships. The really sort of real importance to of managing expectations. And it comes back, you know, just to finish off, it comes back to the point Aileen made about respect for each other. And, you know, that's so critical in the way we engage with Indigenous people, and we've got it wrong so many times. And, you know, basic respect for each other. It's almost like you're in a marriage, but one partner gets changed out every 5 years. And how can you manage a relationship like that where, you know, the Indigenous people, the community is there all the time, but suddenly the company changes, you've got a new partner. We saw that in Juukan Gorge. The PKKP got really upset having been told, well, this person's going to deal with your relationship now, only to see after a few months that, you know, the company shipped that person off to Mongolia or somewhere else, I think, and you know, they're starting again, and I think we've got to get that right. So that's my summary. I hope I've left enough time for a quick discussion. Sarah number one.
I think we're all equal in terms of the numbers here, Tom. But Tom, thank you so much for that summary. That was absolutely fantastic, and the messages I'm getting behind the scenes are just saying, "Wow, this is a brilliant summary." So thank you very much, Tom. I think kind of building on what you've said there in terms of that interconnectedness, the complexity. How do you hand over what you've been building up, but then also as well build and maintain that trust? And something with regards to that, and it's almost inspired by Aileen's talk, which is how do you know when to actually ask somebody else for something? So it's a case of we all know our space really well. And we sometimes make the assumption that somebody else understands our space also. And so we're constantly saying, hey, here, I've got this tool, but actually, what do we need from other people to make our stuff work, if that makes sense? So it's that two-way discussion. So what I was going to suggest is maybe if we go around our panel, and Tom, I'm going to come straight back to you first, and then maybe we can go to Catherine after that and say, if there was one thing that you could ask of somebody else in this stakeholder interconnected map to say, I really would like this from you, because that will help me do my job. And sorry, Tom, I know that I'm landing this on you without any preparation in advance. What would that be that would make your life easier to be able to push forwards with the objectives you're trying to achieve? So what can we give to you to make your life easier?
Well, it's easy for me to answer that because I don't have a job right now, having just left my job. So, but I think Aileen would probably have some good points to make to this. But I think that I think a few people have made the point that you've got to be ready and willing to take the time, and so often we don't. So often we come, especially I'm an engineer, and you come to the table, you assume a level of knowledge and understanding which it's just not there. And you've just got to take the time and be willing to slow down, sometimes a lot. And actually some companies have been incredibly successful when they've been willing to slow down. The classic example being Anglo with Quellaveco, where they had lost their social license and they just came back to the community and said, look, we understand we've got this completely wrong. We're willing to take as much time as is needed. We don't, if it needs 2 years, we'll take 2 years. And then I think the second point, which I think Aileen made, maybe not using the same words, but you've got to be willing to be vulnerable and and be sort of open to the fact that you don't have all the answers. The answers are sort of produced collaboratively.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Tom. So time and willingness to be vulnerable. Catherine, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Nick.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with Tom, to be honest. I think that it is about, it's about having a space that feels safe to ask questions. Even if there is time, that space needs to be safe. You need to not be judged. And I think that that's really, really important. And I think also then just it's a bit of a diversion, but it was mentioned in one of the other, so I think in the session that I was involved in earlier in the week, the importance of, if commitments are made with projects, that those commitments stay with the project and they don't stay with the investor, or they don't stay with the mining company, because we all know how many times projects go through hands, and I think, and that breaks that chain of trust completely, because whether it be something sort of small like a day off, or some that's related to something happening, or it's something huge in terms of a commitment. The commitments tend to get forgotten as projects change hands. So, and I think having a safe space there as well to be able to challenge decisions, and not just to accept a decision because that decision is made. And in my other world that I live in, the notion of critical thinking, which is, I think, slowly seeping into the mining sector, but being able to make informed decisions by looking at a range of different perspectives. So I think that's the change. That's what I'd like, that space for that critical thinking, and looking at things from different perspectives.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Catherine. Nick, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Carly.
Yeah, no, I'm going to answer from a more technical point of view, and maybe more related to the theme of last year's conference than this one. But I'm a petrologist who finds himself in the world of seismologists, and what I'm finding is the communication is difficult. We speak different languages, and it's rather hard to bridge this gap. Now, what we're doing, we're moving into monitoring of tailings dams. And then we have to speak to the engineers, the people who construct the dams, and getting the information, working out how we can, what we do is we measure seismic velocity, and how do we relate that to the material in the dams and how it's behaving during deformation or seepage. This is a real problem. So it's the old problem. How do you break down the silos? How do you communicate between one another? And there are specific response to your question is, I need to get information from engineers to solve the problems we're trying to address right now.
Brilliant. So I need your information, engineers, but also in a way that I can actually understand it and use it. So brilliant. Thanks for that, Nick. Carly, how about yourself? And then we'll go to John.
Yeah, kind of going with what Nick said there, passing on that information from generation to generation as well, and making sure that young people such as myself have opportunities to learn and to grow within the industry and stay within the industry. That's the main goal, right?
Yeah, no, brilliant. Give me the opportunity to grow. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carly. John, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Aileen.
So two quick things. One, the whole concept of the relationship between an exploration company and, say, an Indigenous community. When I do due diligence, which I do periodically with other companies, a significant amount of our time is spent worrying about the pre-existing relationships. And yet, I, as a geologist, don't have tools to assess that, particularly if you're doing it, a 2-day visit to a new area to assess a project, and you're being asked to understand what the quality of the relationships are. I mean, it's impossible. So I need help, huge help, to think through that whole exercise. And the second piece around relationships, and it comes back to Aileen again, which is fantastic, your talk. What fascinates me is this whole human psychology part of it, this question, the whole nature of bias and human bias, and it touches everything, our personal relationships, and the way we mistreat other people, which is outrageous. And a quick shout out for a great movie, Picture a Scientist, If you haven't seen Picture a Scientist, it's a fantastic movie that is an absolute eye-opener, wake-up call for all of us. But anyway, aside from that, I want to understand human psychology. So I want to understand cognitive and all the biases. And it's not just the personal relationships, although they are enormous. It affects all our technical work as well. Geologists, geoscientists are rife with biases that we don't really understand or realize, and it affects our decisions. So it's not just the personal ones, which are very, very important. It's also our ability to do our best jobs that we need to understand human psychology. So I want a human psychologist in my, somewhere back here just to tell me what the hell's going on.
Luckily, John, one of the biases that geologists have is optimism.
Yeah, well, I have that in spades.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, John. And I concur. The Picture a Scientist movie, please do go and watch it. It is fantastic. And thank you very much, Aileen, for making that available during your conference as well. So Aileen, let's come across to yourself, and then we'll go to a triplet of Sarahs. We'll go to Sarah Webber first, and then Sarah Caven.
Also, yes, I probably should have mentioned that Crag sponsored a screening of Picture a Scientist as like an icebreaker style event. And I just wanted to mention, Tom, yes, you did get my name right. It's all good. But I think one of the biggest things for my own perspective anyway is that really helps make things like EDIG and just kind of these conversations possible is support. So I didn't get to go into it in that much detail, but the way EDIG actually started was that because of our annual conference, we went to a virtual platform. The suggestion for hosting a workshop at it on unconscious bias moved to our EDI committee. And there, our director, Maria Hitzman, was just incredibly supportive. And like, this was only ever meant to be like a conversation and things like that. But he was just like extremely supportive and was like, no, we need to do this. And it was really useful because he's kind of an example of someone higher up that often represents a lot of people. And they were kind of the type of people we're trying to target and bring into the conversation. So his support was massively helpful in that. And it also brought a lot of other people who didn't really see themselves in the conversation to take part. And I think that's a really big thing, because there's a lot of people still with these events that will send an email if it's at some conferences where they say, what's the point of that? That's not needed here. And it's kind of shows that it is needed here. But it's also really discouraging for the people organizing them when they get an email saying you've no place here. So just be a bit considerate, I think, of the words you're using and the comments that you're sending to people, because there are real people behind these. It might be like a Twitter account or something, but there's people that run them. And I think kind of everyone's touched on this a little bit, but just be open to learning and your own unconscious biases. And I really think while we came at this from initially a gender-based perspective, there was just so many marginalized communities that I was so, I guess, unaware of myself, and it really shook me how much I didn't know about all the people in my life. And when I think back on it now, I'm a bit more aware of the things that have happened, like going on field trips in undergrad where you don't know what the schedule is. So because of whatever reason, someone can't come on that trip because they didn't know what was involved and they have to sit in a van all day. And that's really easy to deal with if you just think about planning in advance. And also a really big thing, I think, is for everyone to look at their own privileges and see what advantages they might have over someone else, because you might fall into a minoritized category, but you might also have massive benefits and privileges that another group might not. So I think it's just about looking at ourselves and not getting angry or defensive or anything like that, because really this is a learning journey we're all meant to be taking part in, and it's okay to make mistakes. I have made quite a lot of them, and they've all been recorded on camera and on YouTube. So it's just about, I think, re-emphasizing what the word I forgot to use about creating a safe space where we don't judge each other and we're just open to having these conversations and starting to take action.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Aileen. And yes, I can sympathise in terms of all those mistakes being captured on camera for everybody to see. No, you're fantastic, lovely lady. All good. So moving from diversity to a total lack of diversity, i.e. 3 ladies who look very similar and all have the same first name. So I don't know what that means between us. So Sarah Wemmer, let's come to yourself first, and then we'll go to Sarah Caven.
I think the comment I'd like to leave with is for people to understand within their own projects of their timelines. And I think Tom touched on this a bit, but that exploration can be very uncertain, but there is some certainty. Geoscientists, you know, as an exploration example, are testing a deposit model. There's certain information they need to, you know, advance that project. Then you know what your timeline is. So aligning your permitting, your community agreements and engagement along those lines in a holistic fashion when you're planning your project, I think is something that's very achievable. And that's something that continues on through the entire life cycle of a project. So if you can think, okay, what is the legacy of this project? And in exploration, sometimes it's that you leave it behind and 5 groups later, somebody picks it up and finds something that you missed. But it's about managing expectations, those uncertainties, but and planning for success and also planning for failure or an exit. So how are you entering this project and how are you leaving it? And what's that flow chart of information look like? So I think there's thinking about it in a whole life cycle fashion is how I try to approach it.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Sarah. On to the next, Sarah.
Thanks. So many great comments already. I think I would just add, for me, I love the comment that Elaine made about being able to make mistakes. So this idea of a willingness to have dialogue and get around the same table, even if it's uncomfortable, as opposed to, you know, sort of maybe ESG risk or something else just precluding engagement or preventing engagement. I think that's so important. What I've found in many of my discussions more recently on the investment side and the impact investing side, when you say, hey, can I have a chat with you about mining or artisanal mining, people initially are quite often, you know, not interested. But when you dig into it and you start telling a story and you start, you know, highlighting the impact and the importance of the sector and of mining at large, some people open up to the idea. So how do we better capitalize on those conversations? How do we tell the stories of the innovators and the trailblazers and start to really move the needle forward? Both from, you know, the ESG perspective, but also, as I mentioned, like how do we actually embed these values in the core of the business model?
Brilliant. Embedding it in the core of the business model. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. I think we could probably carry on speaking for a lot longer, but I won't take up any more time of your day, apart from just a quick advert for the final session of this year's conference, which happens tomorrow morning UK time. So I'm really sorry, Team Canada and the Americas, in the middle of your night, but you will be able to catch it in a similar style to the EDIG conference, all on YouTube, because it's all being recorded there with all of our wonderful opportunities that we are encountering. That's me trying to say mistakes in a nice way, Aileen, and I am crashing and burning with regards to that at the moment. So what do we have tomorrow morning? We're going to kick off with a very quick interview on the satellite stuff, and yep, I will be sending an email introducing Heather and Gareth to talk satellites and remote sensing immediately after we finish this today, because I think that co-creation and learning together will be brilliant. So we kick off with some satellites. We then go to Ellie Vin, who's going to give us a talk on transforming Malawi's low value stones into multi-million dollars. So I'm really looking forward to this talk, and don't feel like you need to dial in live, but please do catch it online later. We then go to Francesca Santinelli, who I met a couple of years ago working in the DRC, and she's going to talk about, and I think this title is brilliant, it's called Brittany, yeah, that Brittany goes to the DRC. I think that's fantastic as a title. I want to watch it. Well, I will obviously be there. So really looking forward to that tomorrow from Francesca. Then we've got Andy Purvis, who's going to be bringing in some of the biodiversity into the mix. So talking about developing metrics to monitor biodiversity risk in mining operations. Then on to Veer, and they're going to talk about DNA-based methods for mine state biodiversity monitoring, a global approach. So, yeah, so today we had quite a lot of social. Tomorrow we've got quite a lot of biodiversity going on, which will be great. Then we've got Louis Marchand from the OECD, then Jamie Strauss with Digby. So if you haven't come across Digby yet, really tune in to Jamie's spiel, because they've got a really good way of bringing together mining companies and the investors, with ESG being that linking space. So we've got Jamie, then into Jeff Townsend and Kirsty Benham, who are going to talk about the Critical Minerals Association. So this is a fairly new group that was set up within the last 18 months that helps the mining community to engage engaged with the British government. So a huge amount of discussion has been going on over the last 12 months. And as we heard from our politician, Alexander Stafford, this morning, this time last year, nobody was talking about critical minerals in government. Nobody was talking about mining. Now they are all beginning to talk about it, which is really exciting. And a lot of that is thanks to Jeff and Kirsty and what they've been doing with the Critical Minerals Association. And then finally, to help us wrap up, we draw on the skills of Dan Smith, so academic, but who's also worked on the policy and the politics side of mining and minerals, and he spent a lot of time on the mines as well. So Dan is going to help us draw things together with common ground and sustainability hot topics. So an action-packed final session for us tomorrow. Thank you so much to our lovely panelists today, and thank you to everybody who has stayed tuned in. You are all beautiful, you are all wonderful. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.
Well done, Sarah.
Thanks, guys.